Angela, An Inverted Love Story by William Schwenk Gilbert. From Victorian Short Stories, Stories of Courtship. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. I am a poor paralyzed fellow who, for many years past, has been confined to a bed or a sofa. For the last 6 years I have occupied a small room, giving on to one of the side canals of Venice, and having no one about me but a deaf old woman who makes my bed and attends to my food. And there I eke out a poor income of about £30 a year by making watercolor drawings of flowers and fruit. They are the cheapest models in Venice, and these I send to a friend in London, who sells them to a dealer for small sums. But on the whole I am happy and content. It is necessary that I should describe the position of my room rather minutely. Its only window is about 5 feet above the water of the canal, and above it the house projects some 6 feet, and overhangs the water, the projecting portion being supported by stout piles driven into the bed of the canal. This arrangement has the disadvantage, among others, of so limiting my upward view that I am unable to see more than about 10 feet of the height of the house immediately opposite to me, although, by reaching as far out of the window as my infirmity will permit, I can see for a considerable distance up and down the canal, which does not exceed 15 feet in width. But although I can see but little of the material house opposite, I can see its reflection upside down in the canal, and I take a good deal of inverted interest in such of its inhabitants as show themselves from time to time, always upside down, on its balconies and at its windows. When I first occupied my room about 6 years ago, my attention was directed to the reflection of a little girl of 13 or so, as nearly as I could judge, who passed every day on a balcony just above the upward range of my limited field of view. She had a glass of flowers and a crucifix on a little table by her side, and as she sat there in fine weather, from early morning until dark, working assiduously all the time, I concluded that she earned her living by needlework. She was certainly an industrious little girl, and, as far as I could judge by her upside-down reflection, neat in her dress and pretty. She had an old mother, an invalid, who on warm days would sit on the balcony with her, and it interested me to see the little maid wrap the old lady in shawls, and bring pillows for her chair, and a stool for her feet, and every now and again lay down her work and kiss and fondle the old lady for half a minute, and then take up her work again. Time went by, and as the little maid grew up, her reflection grew down, and at last she was quite a little woman of, I suppose, 16 or 17. I could only work for a couple of hours or so in the brightest part of the day, so I had plenty of time on my hands in which to watch her movements, and sufficient imagination to weave a little romance about her, and to endow her with a beauty which, to a great extent, I had to take for granted. I saw, or fancied that I could see, that she began to take an interest in my reflection, which, of course, she could see as I could see hers, and one day when it appeared to me that she was looking right at it, that is to say, when her reflection appeared to be looking right at me, I tried the desperate experiment of nodding to her, and to my intense delight her reflection nodded in reply, and so our two reflections became known to one another. It did not take me very long to fall in love with her, but a long time passed before I could make up my mind to do more than nod to her every morning, when the old woman moved me from my bed to the sofa at the window, and again in the evening, when the little maid left the balcony for that day. One day, however, when I saw her reflection looking at mine, I nodded to her and threw a flower into the canal. She nodded several times in return, and I saw her direct her mother's attention to the incident. Then every morning I threw a flower into the water for good morning, and another in the evening for good night. And I soon discovered that I had not altogether thrown them in vain, for one day she threw a flower to join mine, and she laughed and clapped her hands when she saw the two flowers join forces and float away together. And then every morning and every evening she threw her flower when I threw mine, and when the two flowers met she clapped her hands, and so did I. But when they were separated, as sometimes they were, owing to one of them having met an obstruction which did not catch the other, she threw up her hands in a pretty affectation of despair, which I tried to imitate, but in an English and unsuccessful fashion. And when they were rudely run down by a passing gondola, which happened not unfrequently, she pretended to cry, and I did the same. Then, in pretty pantomime, she would point downwards to the sky to tell me that it was destiny that had caused the shipwreck of our flowers, and I, in pantomime, not nearly so pretty, would try to convey to her that destiny would be kinder next time, and that perhaps tomorrow our flowers would be more fortunate, and so the innocent courtship went on. One day she showed me her crucifix and kissed it, and thereupon I took a little silver crucifix that always stood by me and kissed that, and so she knew that we were one in religion. One day the little maid did not appear on her balcony, and for several days I saw nothing of her, and although I threw my flowers as usual, no flower came to keep it company. However, after a time she reappeared, dressed in black, and crying often, and then I knew that the poor child's mother was dead, and, as far as I knew, she was alone in the world. The flowers came no more for many days, nor did she show any sign of recognition, but kept her eyes on her work, except when she placed her handkerchief to them. And opposite to her was the old lady's chair, and I could see that from time to time she would lay down her work and gaze at it, and then a flood of tears would come to her relief. But at last one day she roused herself to nod to me, and then her flower came, day by day, and my flower went forth to join it, and with varying fortunes the two flowers sailed away as of yore. But the darkest day of all to me was when a good-looking young gondolier, standing right end uppermost in his gondola, for I could see him in the flesh, worked his craft alongside the house, and stood talking to her as she sat on the balcony. They seemed to speak as old friends. Indeed, as well as I could make out, he held her by the hand during the whole of their interview, which lasted quite half an hour. Eventually he pushed off, and left my heart heavy within me. But I soon took heart of grace, for as soon as he was out of sight, the little maid threw two flowers growing on the same stem, an allegory of which I could make nothing, until it broke upon me that she meant to convey to me that he and she were brother and sister, and that I had no cause to be sad, and thereupon I nodded to her cheerily, and she nodded to me, and laughed aloud, and I laughed in return, and all went on again as before. Then came a dark and dreary time, for it became necessary that I should undergo treatment that confined me absolutely to my bed for many days, and I worried and fretted to think that the little maid and I should see each other no longer, and worse still, that she would think that I had gone away without even hinting to her that I was going. And I lay awake at night wondering how I could let her know the truth, and 50 plans flitted through my brain, all appearing to be feasible enough at night, but absolutely wild and impracticable in the morning. One day, and it was a bright day indeed for me, the old woman who tended me told me that a gondolier had inquired whether the English signor had gone away or had died. And so I learnt that the little maid had been anxious about me, and that she had sent her brother to inquire, and the brother had no doubt taken to her the reason of my protracted absence from the window. From that day, and ever after during my 3 weeks of bed-keeping, a flower was found every morning on the ledge of my window, which was within easy reach of anyone in a boat, and when at last a day came when I could be moved, I took my accustomed place on the sofa at the window, and the little maid saw me, and stood on her head, so to speak, and clapped her hands upside down with a delight that was as eloquent as my right end up delight could be. And so the first time the gondolier passed my window I beckoned to him, and he pushed alongside, and told me with many bright smiles that he was glad indeed to see me well again. Then I thanked him and his sister for their many kind thoughts about me during my retreat, and then I learnt from him that her name was Angela, and that she was the best and purest maiden in all Venice, and that anyone might think himself happy indeed who could call her sister, but that he was happier even than her brother, for he was to be married to her. And indeed they were to be married the next day. Thereupon my heart seemed to swell to bursting, and the blood rushed through my veins so that I could hear it and nothing else for a while. I managed at last to stammer forth some words of awkward congratulation, and he left me, singing merrily, after asking permission to bring his bride to see me on the morrow as they returned from church. "For," said he, "my Angela has known you very long, ever since she was a child, and she has often spoken to me of the poor Englishman who was a good Catholic, and who lay all day long for years and years on a sofa at a window, and she had said over and over again how dearly she wished she could speak to him and comfort him, and one day, when you threw a flower into the canal, she asked me whether she might throw another, and I told her yes, for he would understand that it meant sympathy for one sorely afflicted. And so I learned that it was pity, and not love, except indeed such love as is akin to pity, that prompted her to interest herself in my welfare, and there was an end of it all. For the two flowers that I thought were on one stem were two flowers tied together, but I could not tell that, and they were meant to indicate that she and the gondolier were affianced lovers, and my expressed pleasure at this symbol delighted her, for she took it to mean that I rejoiced in her happiness. And the next day the gondolier came with a train of other gondoliers, all decked in their holiday garb, and on his gondola sat Angela, happy and blushing at her happiness. Then he and she entered the house in which I dwelt, and came into my room, and it was strange indeed, after so many years of inversion, to see her with her head above her feet. And then she wished me happiness, and a speedy restoration to good health, which could never be. And I, in broken words, and with tears in my eyes, gave her the little silver crucifix that had stood by my bed or my table for so many years, and Angela took it reverently, and crossed herself and kissed it, and so departed with her delighted husband. And as I heard the song of the gondoliers as they went their way, the song dying away in the distance as the shadows of the sundown closed around me, I felt that they were singing the requiem of the only love that had ever entered my heart. End of Angela, an Inverted Love Story by William Schwenk Gilbert, recorded by Andrew Short.
The Brouge by Saki. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Timothy Casey. The Brouge by Saki. The hunting season had come to an end, and the mullets had not succeeded in selling the Brouge. There had been a kind of tradition in the family for the past 3 or 4 years, a sort of fatalistic hope that the Brouge would find a purchaser before the hunting was over, but seasons came and went without anything happening to justify such ill-founded optimism. The animal had been named Berserker in the earlier stages of its career. It had been rechristened the Brouge later on, in recognition of the fact that once acquired, it was extremely difficult to get rid of. The unkinder wits of the neighborhood had been known to suggest that the first letter of its name was superfluous. The Brouge had been variously described in sales catalogues as a lightweight hunter, a lady's hack, and more simply, but still with a touch of imagination, as a useful brown gelding standing 15.1. Toby Mullet had ridden him for 4 seasons with the West Wessex. You can ride almost any sort of horse with the West Wessex as long as it is an animal that knows the country. The Brouge knew the country intimately, having personally created most of the gaps that were to be met within the banks and hedges for many miles round. His manner and characteristics were not ideal in the hunting field, but he was probably rather safer to ride to hounds than he was as a hack on the country roads. According to the Mullet family, he was not really road shy, but there were 1 or 2 objects of dislike that brought on sudden attacks of what Toby called the swerving sickness. Motors and cycles he treated with tolerant disregard, but pigs, wheelbarrows, piles of stones by the roadside, perambulators in a village street, gates painted too aggressively white, and sometimes, but not always, the newer kind of beehives, turned him aside from his tracks in a vivid imitation of the zigzag course of forked lightning. If a pheasant rose noisily from the other side of a hedgerow, the Brouge would spring into the air at the same moment, but this may have been due to a desire to be companionable. The Mullet family contradicted the widely prevalent report that the horse was a confirmed crib biter. It was about the 3rd week in May that Mrs. Mullet, relicit of the late Sylvester Mullet, and mother of Toby and a bunch of daughters, assailed Clovis Sangrail on the outskirts of the village with a breathless catalogue of local happenings. "You know our new neighbor, Mr. Penricard?" she vociferated. "Awfully rich, owns tin mines in Cornwall, middle-aged and rather quiet. He's taken the Red House on a long lease and spent a lot of money on alterations and improvements. Well, Toby sold him the Brouge." Clovis spent a moment or 2 in assimilating the astonishing news. Then he broke out in unstinted congratulation. If he had belonged to a more emotional race, he would probably have kissed Mrs. Mullet. "How wonderfully lucky to have pulled it off at last. Now you can buy a decent animal. I've always said that Toby was clever. Ever so many congratulations." "Don't congratulate me. It's the most unfortunate thing that could have happened," said Mrs. Mullet dramatically. Clovis stared at her in amazement. "Mr. Penricard," said Mrs. Mullet, sinking her voice to what she imagined to be an oppressive whisper, though it rather resembled a hoarse, excited squeak, "Mr. Penricard has just begun to pay attentions to Jessie. Slight at first, but now unmistakable. I was a fool not to have seen it sooner. Yesterday at the rectory garden party he asked her what her favourite flowers were, and she told him carnations, and today a whole stack of carnations has arrived, clove and malmaison, and lovely dark red ones, regular exhibition blooms. and a box of chocolates that he must have got on purpose from London. And he's asked her to go round the links with him tomorrow. And now, just at this critical moment, Toby has sold him that animal. It's a calamity." "But you've been trying to get the horse off your hands for years," said Clovis. "I've got a house full of daughters," said Mrs. Mullet, "and I've been trying, well, not to get them off my hands, of course, but a husband or two wouldn't be amiss among the lot of them. There are 6 of them, you know." "I don't know," said Clovis. "I've never counted, but I expect you're right as to the number. Mothers generally know these things." "And now," continued Mrs. Mullet in her tragic whisper, "when there's a rich husband in prospect imminent on the horizon, Toby goes and sells him that miserable animal. It will probably kill him if he tries to ride it. Anyway, it will kill any affection he might have felt toward any member of our family. What is to be done? We can't very well ask to have the horse back. You see, we praised it up like anything when we thought there was a chance of his buying it, and said it was just the animal to suit him." "Couldn't you steal it out of his stable and send it to grass at some farm miles away?" suggested Clovis. "Write 'Votes for Women' on the stable door, and the thing would pass for suffragette outrage. No one who knew the horse could possibly suspect you of wanting to get it back again." "Every newspaper in the country would ring with the affair," said Mrs. Mullet. "Can't you imagine the headline? 'Valuable hunter stolen by suffragettes.' The police would scour the countryside till they found the animal." "Well, Jessie must try to get it back from Penricarde on the plea that it's an old favourite. She can say it was only sold because the stable had to be pulled down under the terms of an old repairing lease, and that now it had been arranged that the stable is to stand for a couple of years longer." "It sounds a queer proceeding to ask for a horse back when you've just sold him," said Mrs. Mullet, "but something must be done, and done at once. The man is not used to horses, and I believe I told him it was as quiet as a lamb. After all, lambs go kicking and twisting about as if they were demented, don't they?" "The lamb has an entirely unmerited character for sedateness," agreed Clovis. Jessie came back from the golf links next day in a state of mingled elation and concern. "It's all right about the proposal," she announced. "He came out with it at the 6th hole. I said I must have time to think it over. I accepted him at the 7th. "My dear," said her mother, "I think a little more maidenly reserve and hesitation would have been advisable, as you've known him so short a time. You might have waited till the 9th hole." "The 7th is a very long hole," said Jessie. "Besides, the tension was putting us both off our game. By the time we'd got to the 9th hole, we'd settled a lot of things. The honeymoon is to be spent in Corsica, with perhaps a flying visit to Naples if we feel like it, and a week in London to wind up with. 2 of his nieces are to be asked to be bridesmaids, so with our lot there will be 7, which is rather a lucky number. You are to wear your pearl grey, with any amount of Honiton lace jabbed into it. By the way, he's coming over this evening to ask your consent to the whole affair. So far all's well, but about the brogue it's a different matter. I told him the legend about the stable, and how keen we were about buying the horse back, but he seems equally keen on keeping it. He said he must have horse exercise now that he's living in the country, and he's going to start riding tomorrow. He's ridden a few times in the Row, on an animal that was accustomed to carry octogenarians and people undergoing rest cures, and that's about all his experience in the saddle. Oh, and he rode a pony once in Norfolk when he was 15 and the pony 24. And tomorrow he's going to ride the brogue. I shall be a widow before I'm married, and I do so want to see what Corsica's like. It looks so silly on the map." Clovis was sent for in haste, and the developments of the situation put before him. "Nobody can ride that animal with any safety," said Mrs. Mullet, "except Toby, and he knows by long experience what it is going to shy at, and manages to swerve at the same time." "I did hint to Mr. Penricarde, to Vincent I should say, that the brogue didn't like white gates," said Jessie. "White gates!" exclaimed Mrs. Mullet. "Did you mention what effect a pig has on him? He'll have to go past Lockyer's farm to get to the high road, and there's sure to be a pig or two grunting about in the lane." "He's taken a rather dislike to turkeys lately," said Toby. "It's obvious that Penricarde mustn't be allowed to go out on that animal," said Clovis, "at least not until Jessie has married him, and tired of him. I tell you what, ask him to a picnic tomorrow, starting at an early hour. He's not the sort to go out for a ride before breakfast. The day after I'll get the rector to drive him over to Crowley before lunch to see the new cottage hospital they're building there. The Brogue will be standing idle in the stable, and Toby can offer to exercise it. Then it can pick up a stone or something of the sort and go conveniently lame. If you hurry on the wedding a bit, the lameness fiction can be kept up till the ceremony is safely over." Mrs. Mullet belonged to an emotional race, and she kissed Clovis. It was nobody's fault that the rain came down in torrents the next morning, making a picnic a fantastic impossibility. It was also nobody's fault, but sheer ill luck, that the weather cleared up sufficiently in the afternoon to tempt Mr. Penricarde to make his first essay with the Brogue. They did not get as far as the pigs at Lockyer's farm. The rectory gate was painted a dull, unobtrusive green, but it had been white a year or two ago, and the Brogue never forgot that he had been in the habit of making a violent curtsy, a backpedal and a swerve at this particular point in the road. Subsequently, there being apparently no further call on his services, he broke his way into the rectory orchard, where he found a hen turkey in a coop. Later visitors to the orchard found the coop almost intact, but very little left of the turkey. Mr. Penricarde, a little stunned and shaken, and suffering from a bruised knee and some minor damages, good-naturedly ascribed the accident to his own inexperience with horses and country roads, and allowed Jessie to nurse him back into complete recovery and golf fitness within something less than a week. In the list of wedding presents which the local newspaper published a fortnight or so later appeared the following item: brown saddle horse, the Brogue, bridegroom's gift to bride. Which showed, said Tony Mullet, that he knew nothing. Or else, said Clovis, that he had a very pleasing wit. End of The Brogue by Saki. Recording by Timothy Casey, Modesto, California.
The Cactus, from Waifs and Strays by O. Henry. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Cactus by O. Henry. The most notable thing about time is that it is so purely relative. A large amount of reminiscence is, by common consent, conceded to the drowning man, and it is not past belief that one may review an entire courtship while removing one's gloves. That is what Trysdale was doing, standing by a table in his bachelor apartments. On the table stood a singular-looking green plant in a red earthen jar. The plant was one of the species of cacti, and was provided with long tentacular leaves that perpetually swayed with the slightest breeze, with a peculiar beckoning motion. Trysdale's friend, the brother of the bride, stood at a sideboard, complaining at being allowed to drink alone. Both men were in evening dress. White favors like stars upon their coats shone through the gloom of the apartment. As he slowly unbuttoned his gloves, there passed through Trysdale's mind a swift, scarifying retrospect of the last few hours. It seemed that in his nostrils was still the scent of the flowers that had been banked in odorous masses about the church, and in his ears the low-pitched hum of 1,000 well-bred voices, the rustle of crisp garments, and, most insistently recurring, the drawling words of the minister irrevocably binding her to another. From this last hopeless point of view he still strove, as if it had become a habit of his mind to reach some conjecture as to why and how he had lost her. Shaken rudely by the uncompromising fact, He had suddenly found himself confronted by a thing he had never before faced. His own innermost, unmitigated, arid, unbedecked self. He saw all the garbs of pretense and egoism that he had worn now turned to rags of folly. He shuddered at the thought that to others before now the garments of his soul must have appeared sorry and threadbare. Vanity and conceit, these were the joints in his armor. And how free from either she had always been. But why? As she had slowly moved up the aisle toward the altar, he had felt an unworthy, sullen exultation that had served to support him. He had told himself that her paleness was from thoughts of another than the man to whom she was about to give herself. But even that poor consolation had been wrenched from him. For when he saw that swift, limpid, upward look that she gave the man when he took her hand, he knew himself to be forgotten. Once that same look had been raised to him, and he had gauged its meaning. Indeed, his conceit had crumbled. Its last prop was gone. Why had it ended thus? There had been no quarrel between them. Nothing. For the thousandth time he remarshalled in his mind the events of those last few days before the tide had so suddenly turned. She had always insisted upon placing him upon a pedestal, and he had accepted her homage with royal grandeur. It had been a very sweet incense that she had burned before him, so modest, he told himself, so childlike and worshipful, and, he would once have sworn, so sincere. She had invested him with an almost supernatural number of high attributes and excellencies and talents, and he had absorbed the oblation as a desert drinks the rain that can coax from it no promise of blossom or fruit. As Trysdale grimly wrenched apart the seam of his last glove, the crowning instance of his fatuous and tardily mourned egoism came vividly back to him. The scene was the night when he had asked her to come up on his pedestal with him and share his greatness. He could not now, for the pain of it, allow his mind to dwell upon the memory of her convincing beauty that night, the careless wave of her hair, the tenderness and virginal charm of her looks and words. But they had been enough, and they had brought him to speak. During their conversation she had said, "And Captain Carruthers tells me that you speak the Spanish language like a native. Why have you hidden this accomplishment from me? Is there anything you do not know?" Now, Carruthers was an idiot. No doubt he, Trysdale, had been guilty (he sometimes did such things) of airing at the club some old canting Castilian proverb dug from the hot-potch and at the back of dictionaries. Carruthers, who was one of his incontinent admirers, was the very man to have magnified this exhibition of doubtful erudition. But, alas! the incense of her admiration had been so sweet and flattering. He allowed the imputation to pass without denial, without protest. He allowed her to twine about his brow this spurious bay of Spanish scholarship. He let it grace his conquering head, and among its soft convolutions he did not feel the prick of the thorn that was to pierce him later. How glad, how shy, how tremulous she was! How she fluttered like a snared bird when he laid his mightiness at her feet! He could have sworn, and he could swear now, that unmistakable consent was in her eyes. But, coyly, she would give him no direct answer. "I will send you my answer tomorrow," she said. And he, the indulgent, confident victor, smilingly granted the delay. The next day he waited, impatient, in his rooms for the word. At noon her groom came to the door and left the strange cactus in the red earthen jar. There was no note, no message, merely a tag upon the plant bearing a barbarous foreign or botanical name. He waited until night, but her answer did not come. His large pride and hurt vanity kept him from seeking her. 2 evenings later they met at a dinner. Their greetings were conventional, but she looked at him breathless, wondering, eager. He was courteous, adamant, waiting her explanation. With womanly swiftness, she took her cue from his manner and turned to snow and ice. Thus, and wider from this on, they had drifted apart. Where was his fault? Who had been to blame? Humbled now, he sought the answer amid the ruins of his self-conceit. If... The voice of the other man in the room, querulously intruding upon his thoughts, aroused him. "I say, Trysdale, what the deuce is the matter with you? You look unhappy, as if you yourself had been married, instead of having acted merely as an accomplice. Look at me, another accessory, come 2,000 miles on a garlicky, cockroachy banana steamer, all the way from South America to connive at the sacrifice. Please to observe how lightly my guilt rests upon my shoulders. Only little sister I had, too, and now she's gone. Come now, take something to ease your conscience." "I don't drink just now, thanks," said Trysdale. "Your brandy," resumed the other, coming over and joining him, "is abominable. Run down to see me some time at Punta Redonda, and try some of our stuff that old Garcia smuggles in. It's worth the trip. Hallo, here's an old acquaintance. Wherever did you rake up this cactus, Trysdale?" "A present," said Trysdale, "from a friend." "Know the species?" "Very well. It's a tropical concern. See hundreds of them around Punta every day. Here's the name on this tag tied to it. Know any Spanish, Trysdale?" "No," said Trysdale, with the bitter wraith of a smile. "Is it Spanish?" "Yes. The natives imagine the leaves are reaching out and beckoning to you. They call it by this name, Vento Marme. Name means in English, 'Come and take me.'" End of The Cactus by O. Henry. Read by Bill Mosley, Frellsburg, Texas, USA.
Captain Veneno's Proposal of Marriage by Pedro Antonio de Alarcon, from First Love and Other Fascinating Stories of Spanish Life. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. "Great heavens! What a woman!" cried the captain, and stamped with fury. "Not without reason have I been trembling and in fear of her from the first time I saw her. It must have been a warning of fate that I stopped playing écarté with her. It was also a bad omen that I passed so many sleepless nights. Was there ever mortal in a worse perplexity than I am? How can I leave her alone without a protector, loving her as I do, more than my own life? And on the other hand, how can I marry her, after all my declaimings against marriage?" Then, turning to Augustius, "What would they say of me in the club? What would people say of me if they met me in the street with a woman on my arm, or if they found me at home, just about to feed a child in swaddling clothes? I, to have children? To worry about them? To live in eternal fear that they might fall sick or die? Augustius, believe me, as true as there is a God above us, I am absolutely unfit for it. I should behave in such a way that after a short while you would call upon heaven, either to be divorced or to become a widow. Listen to my advice. Do not marry me, even if I ask you." "What a strange creature you are," said the young woman, without allowing herself to be at all discomposed, and sitting very erect in her chair. "All that you are only telling to yourself. From what do you conclude that I wish to be married to you, that I would accept your offer, and that I should not prefer living by myself, even if I had to work day and night, as so many girls do who are orphans?" "How do I come to that conclusion?" answered the captain with the greatest candour. "Because it cannot be otherwise. Because we love each other. Because we are drawn to each other. Because a man such as I, and a woman such as you, cannot live in any other way. Do you suppose I do not understand that? Don't you suppose I have reflected on it before now? Do you think I am indifferent in your good name and reputation? I have spoken plainly in order to speak, in order to fly from my own conviction, in order to examine whether I can escape from this terrible dilemma, which is robbing me of my sleep, and whether I can possibly find an expedient so that I need not marry you, to do which I shall finally be compelled, if you stand by your resolve to make your way alone." "Alone, alone," repeated Augustius roguishly. "And why not with a worthier companion? Who tells you that I shall not some day meet a man whom I like, and who is not afraid to marry me?" "Augustius, let us skip that," growled the captain, his face turning scarlet. "And why should we not talk about it?" "Let us pass over that, and let me say at the same time that I will murder the man who dares to ask for your hand. But it is madness on my part to be angry without any reason. I am not so dull as not to see how we two stand. Shall I tell you? We love each other. Do not tell me I am mistaken. That would be lying. And here is the proof. If you did not love me, I too should not love you. Let us try to meet one another halfway. I ask for a delay of 10 years. When I shall have completed my half-century, and when, a feeble old man, I shall have become familiar with the idea of slavery, then we will marry without anyone knowing about it. We will leave Madrid and go to the country, where we shall have no spectators, where there will be nobody to make fun of me. But until this happens, please take half of my income secretly, and without any human soul ever knowing anything about it. You continue to live here, and I remain in my house. We will see each other, but only in the presence of witnesses, for instance in society. We will write to each other every day. So as not to endanger your good name, I will never pass through this street, and on Memorial Day only we will go to the cemetery together with Rosa." Augustius could not but smile at the last proposal of the good captain, and her smile was not mocking, but contented and happy, as if some cherished hope had dawned in her heart, as if it were the first ray of the sun of happiness which was about to rise in her heaven. But, being a woman, though as brave and free from artifices as few of them, she yet managed to subdue the signs of joy rising within her. She acted as if she cherished not the slightest hope, and said, with the distant coolness which is usually the special and genuine sign of chaste reserve, "You make yourself ridiculous with your peculiar conditions. You stipulate for the gift of an engagement ring, for which nobody has yet asked you." "I know still another way out, for a compromise, but that is really the last one. Do you fully understand, my young lady from Aragon? It is the last way out, which a man, also from Aragon, begs leave to explain to you." She turned her head and looked straight into his eyes, with an expression indescribably earnest, captivating, quiet, and full of expectation. The captain had never seen her features so beautiful and expressive. At that moment she looked to him like a queen. "Augustius," said, or rather stammered, this brave soldier, who had been under fire 100 times, and who had made such a deep impression on the young girl through his charging under a rain of bullets like a lion, "I have the honour to ask for your hand, on one certain, essential, unchangeable condition. Tomorrow morning, today, as soon as the papers are in order, as quickly as possible. I can live without you no longer." The glances of the young girl became milder, and she rewarded him for his decided heroism with a tender and bewitching smile. "But I repeat that it is on one condition," the bold warrior hastened to repeat, feeling that Augustius's glances made him confused and weak. "On what condition?" asked the young girl, turning fully round, and now holding him under the witchery of her sparkling black eyes. "On the condition," he stammered, "that in case we have children, we send them to the orphanage. I mean, on this point I will never yield. Well, do you consent? For heaven's sake, say yes." "Why should I not consent to it, Captain Veneno?" answered Augustius with a peal of laughter. "You shall take them there yourself, or, better still, we both of us will take them there, and we will give them up without kissing them or anything else. Don't you think we shall take them there?" Thus spoke Augustius, and looked at the captain with exquisite joy in her eyes. The good captain thought he would die of happiness. A flood of tears burst from his eyes. He folded the blushing girl in his arms and said, "So I am lost." "Irretrievably lost, Captain Veneno," answered Augustius. One morning in May 1852, that is, 4 years after the scene just described, a friend of mine who told me this story stopped his horse in front of a mansion on San Francisco Avenue in Madrid. He threw the reins to his groom, and asked the long-coated footman who met him at the door, "Is your master at home?" "If your honour will be good enough to walk upstairs, you will find him in the library. His Excellency does not like to have visitors announced. Everybody can go up to him directly." "Fortunately I know the house thoroughly," said the stranger to himself, while he mounted the stairs. "In the library? Well, well, who would have thought of Captain Veneno ever taking to the sciences?" Wandering through the rooms, the visitor met another servant who repeated, "The master is in the library." And at last he came to the door of the room in question, opened it quickly, and stood, almost turned to stone for astonishment, before the remarkable group which it offered to his view. In the middle of the room, on the carpet which covered the floor, a man was crawling on all fours. On his back rode a little fellow about 3 years old, who was kicking the man's sides with his heels. Another small boy, who might have been 1.5 years old, stood in front of the man's head, and had evidently been tumbling his hair. One hand held the father's neckerchief, and the little fellow was tugging at it as if it had been a halter, shouting with delight in his merry child's voice, "Gee up, donkey! Gee up!" End of Captain Veneno's Proposal of Marriage by Pedro Antonio de Alarcon.
The Cat's Elopement, from the Pink Fairy Book, edited by Andrew Lang, translated from the German book Japanese Fairy Tales and Sayings by David Bronze. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Sharon House. Once upon a time there lived a cat of marvelous beauty, with a skin as soft and shining as silk, and wise green eyes that could see even in the dark. His name was Gone, and he belonged to a music teacher, who was so fond and proud of him that he would not have parted with him for anything in the world. Now, not far from the music master's house, there dwelt a lady who possessed a most lovely little pussy-cat called Coma. She was such a little dear altogether, and blinked her eyes so daintily, and ate her supper so tidily. And when she finished, she licked her pink nose so delicately with her little tongue, that her mistress was never tired of saying, "Coma, Coma, what should I do without you?" Well, It happened one day that these two went out for an evening stroll, met under a cherry tree, and in one moment fell madly in love with each other. Gon had long felt that it was time for him to find a wife, for all the ladies in the neighbourhood paid him so much attention that it made him quite shy, but he was not easy to please and did not care about any of them. Now, before he had time to think, Cupid had entangled him in his net, and he was filled with love towards Coma. She fully returned his passion, but, like a woman, she saw the difficulties in the way, and consulted sadly with Gon as to the means of overcoming them. Gon entreated his master to set matters right by buying Coma, but her mistress would not part from her. Then the music master was asked to sell Gon to the lady, but he declined to listen to any such suggestion, so everything remained as before. At length the love of the couple grew to such a pitch that they determined to please themselves and to seek their fortunes together. So one moonlight night they stole away and ventured out into an unknown world. All day long they marched bravely on through the sunshine, till they had left their homes far behind them, and towards evening they found themselves in a large park. The wanderers by this time were very hot and tired, and the grass looked very soft and inviting, and the trees cast cool, deep shadows, when suddenly an ogre appeared in this paradise in the shape of a big, big dog. He came springing towards them, showing all his teeth, and Coma shrieked and rushed up a cherry tree. Gon, however, stood his ground boldly, and prepared to give battle, for he felt that Coma's eyes were upon him, and that he must not run away. But alas! his courage would have availed him nothing had his enemy once touched him, for he was large and powerful and very fierce. From her perch in the tree, Coma saw it all, and screamed with all her might, hoping that someone would hear and come to help. Luckily a servant of the princess to whom the park belonged was walking by, and he drove off the dog, and picking up the trembling Gon in his arms, carried him to his mistress. So poor little Coma was left alone, while Gon was borne away full of trouble, not in the least knowing what to do. Even the attention paid him by the princess, who was delighted with his beauty and pretty ways, did not console him. But there was no use in fighting against fate, and he could only wait and see what would turn up. The princess, Gon's new mistress, was so good and kind that everybody loved her, and she would have led a happy life had it not been for a serpent who had fallen in love with her, and was constantly annoying her by his presence. Her servants had orders to drive him away as often as he appeared, but as they were careless and the serpent very sly, it sometimes happened that he was able to slip past them and to frighten the princess by appearing before her. One day she was seated in her room, playing on her favourite musical instrument, when she felt something gliding up her sash, and saw her enemy making his way to kiss her cheek. She shrieked and threw herself backwards, and Gon, who had been curled up on a stool at her feet, understood her terror, and with one bound seized the snake by his neck. He gave him one bite and one shake, and flung him on the ground, where he lay, never to worry the princess any more. Then she took Gon in her arms, and praised and caressed him, and saw that he had the nicest bits to eat, and the softest mats to lie on, and he would have had nothing in the world to wish for, if only he could have seen Coma again. Time passed on, and one morning Gon lay before the house door, basking in the sun. He looked lazily at the world stretched out before him, and saw in the distance a big ruffian of a cat teasing and ill-treating quite a little one. He jumped up, full of rage, and chased away the big cat, and then he turned to comfort the little one, when his heart nearly burst with joy to find that it was Coma. At first Coma did not know him again. He had grown so large and stately. But when it dawned upon her who it was, her happiness knew no bounds, and they rubbed their heads and noses again and again, while their purring might have been heard a mile off. Paw in paw they appeared before the princess, and told her the story of their life and its sorrows. The princess wept for sympathy, and promised that they should never more be parted, but should live with her to the end of their days. By and by the princess herself got married, and brought a prince to dwell in the palace in the park, and she told him all about her 2 cats, and how brave Gon had been, and how he had delivered her from her enemy the serpent. And when the prince heard, he swore they should never leave them, but should go with the princess wherever she went. So it all fell out the way the princess wished, and Gon and Coma had many children, and so had the princess, and they all played together and were friends to the end of their lives. End of The Cat's Elopement by David Bronze.
The Fable of Why Sweetie Flew the Track. From More Fables by George Ade. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Bill Mosley. The Fable of Why Sweetie Flew the Track by George Ade. Once there were 2 married people who used Lovey and Pet when they were in company, and as soon as they were at home they threw things at each other. She used to watch him through a hole in the curtain to see if he flirted with any women as he walked up the street, and he bribed the hired girl to tell him everything that happened while he was off the reservation. They did not Mocha and Java worth a cent. The cardboard motto in the dining room said, "Love one another," but they were too busy to read. He had a clearing on the top of his head and wore side whiskers, and bore a general resemblance to the before in an ad for a facial treatment, and yet she suspected that all the women in town were crazy to steal him away from her. Likewise, inasmuch as she was the same width all the way up and down, the same as a poster girl, and used to sport a velvet shroud with black beads on it, and could wield a toothpick and carry on a conversation at the same time, he knew that sooner or later some handsome wretch with money would try to abduct her. Sometimes he would bring a friend home to dinner, and then if the friend extended himself and told the missus how well she was looking, or perjured himself over her hand-painting, Papa would get a grouch and hide in the corner. Then she would fan herself rapidly and ask, "Aren't you well, dear?" Dear would force one of those dying martyr smiles and reply, "I am quite well, Puss." Then Puss would tell the visitor that Baby was simply ruining his health through devotion to his employers, but they didn't seem to appreciate him at all. After the visitor went away, there would be language all over the shop, and the poor hired girl would lock the door and write to the intelligence office for a new place. Truly, it was a happy little home with the reverse English. She would frisk his wardrobe every day or two, looking for evidence, and he would compel her to itemize her accounts so that he might be sure she was not giving jewelry to the Iceman. She would find a certain passage in a book relating to man's cruelty and woman's silent suffering, and then she would mark the passage and put it where he could find it. Then, when he found it, he would mark it rot and put it where she could find it, and then she would weep and write letters to lady authors telling them how sad and lonely she was. But all the time they kept up an affectionate front before their acquaintances. They thought it better to avoid scenes in public, and although each knew that the other was false and had ceased to love, they could not bring themselves to think of a separation or a divorce on account of the cat. Their cat. The cat must never know. However, one of his business associates was on. He was a bachelor and had lived at a European hotel for years, and he knew just how to arbitrate a domestic scrap. So he sat down one day and gave the husband a good talking to. He said it was a shame that such nice people should have their differences when it was so easy to be happy. With that he handed over a slew of platitudes and proverbs, such as, "A soft answer turneth away wrath," "It takes two to make a quarrel," "Think twice before you speak once," etc. The gist of this heart-to-heart talk was that any husband could stop rough-house proceedings and shoot all kinds of sweetness and light into the sassiest mooch a wife ever got on to herself, if only he would refuse to quarrel with her, receive her flings without a show of wrath, and get up every morning ready to plug for a renaissance of their early love. Oh, but it was a beauty-bright system. The European hotel bachelor said it couldn't lose. The husband decided to give it a trial. That very afternoon he met his wife, who had come out in her long fawn-colored coat that fell straight in the back. She had her upper rigging set and was trying to blanket everything on the street. He flashed a smiling countenance and said he was glad to see her. Then, instead of asking her when she left the house, and where she had been since then, and how soon she expected to go home again, he told her she was looking unusually charming. She was startled. He handed her a 10 and told her to have a good time. Now, usually, when she wanted any pin money, she had to pry it out of him. On her way home, her mind was in a tumult. Why had he given her the con speech and all that money? What was the ulterior motive? What had he been doing that he should attempt to coddle her into a forgiving mood? Did he fear that she would get next to his past? Huh? He just couldn't fool her. She knew something was doing. Else, why should he try to fix her? As soon as he came home that evening, she accused him and said she knew all. Instead of countering with the usual jibe, he told her that she was the only woman he had ever loved, and would she go to a show that evening? She went, thinking that perhaps the other woman might be there, and she could detect some signal passing between them. While at the theater, he fanned her and explained the plot, and was all attention. They rode home in a cab because he said a car wasn't good enough for his queen. After they were at home, he asked her to sing the song he had liked so much in the old days, "My Bonnie Lies Over the Ocean." This was conclusive proof to her that the hussy's name was Bonnie. Next morning, before he started away, he kissed her, and it wasn't any make-believe such as you see in comic opera. It was a genuine Olga Nethersoul buss, full of linger and adhesion. To cap the climax, he said he would stop in and order some violets. As soon as the door slammed, she staggered toward the kitchen, holding on to the furniture here and there, the same as a Sardou heroine. In the kitchen was a box of rough-on-rats. Hastily concealing it beneath the loose folds of her morning gown, she went to her room and looked in the mirror. Ah, when he saw that cold, white face, then he would be sorry. Upon second thought, this didn't seem to be a moral certainty, so she weakened and had the girl take the poison and hide it. She said she would live to forget his perfidy. That day she went back to Mamma and took the cat with her. When he came home in the twilight, he found no wife, no cat, only a scribbled note saying that he could no longer deceive her, that she had seen through his diabolical plan to lull her suspicions, and that she was no longer safe in the same house. When the deserted husband went to the friend and told him what had happened, the wise bachelor said, "I see. You did not go at her strong enough." Moral: they don't know anything about it. End of The Fable of Why Sweetie Flew the Track by George Ade. Recording by Bill Mosley, Frellsburg, Texas, USA.
The Four Kinds of Love by Abdul Baha Abbas, from Talks by Abdul Baha given in Paris, translated by Lady Sarah Louisa Blomfield. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are on the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Four Kinds of Love, 97, Cadogan Gardens, London, Saturday, January 4th, 1913. What a power is love! It is the most wonderful, the greatest of all living powers. Love gives life to the lifeless. Love lights a flame in the heart that is cold. Love brings hope to the hopeless, and gladdens the hearts of the sorrowful. In the world of existence, there is indeed no greater power than the power of love. When the heart of man is aglow with the flame of love, he is ready to sacrifice all, even his life. In the Gospel it is said, God is love. There are four kinds of love. The first is the love that flows from God to man. It consists of the inexhaustible graces, the divine effulgence, and heavenly illumination. Through this love, the world of being receives life. Through this love, man is endowed with physical existence until, through the breath of the Holy Spirit, this same love, he receives eternal life and becomes the image of the living God. This love is the origin of all the love in the world of creation. The second is the love that flows from man to God. This is faith, attraction to the divine, enkindlement, progress, entrance into the kingdom of God, receiving the bounties of God, illumination with the lights of the kingdom. This love is the origin of all philanthropy. This love causes the hearts of men to reflect the rays of the sun of reality. The third is the love of God towards the self or identity of God. This is the transfiguration of His beauty, the reflection of Himself in the mirror of His creation. This is the reality of love, the ancient love, the eternal love. Through one ray of this love, all other love exists. The fourth is the love of man for man. The love which exists between the hearts of believers is prompted by the ideal of the unity of spirits. This love is attained through the knowledge of God, so that men may see the divine love reflected in the heart. Each sees in the other the beauty of God reflected in the soul, and finding this point of similarity, they are attracted to one another in love. This love will make all men the waves of one sea. This love will make them all the stars of one heaven and the fruits of one tree. This love will bring the realization of true accord, the foundation of real unity. But the love which sometimes exists between friends is not true love, because it is subject to transmutation. This is merely fascination. As the breeze blows, the slender trees yield. If the wind is in the east, the tree leans to the west, and if the wind turns to the west, the tree leans to the east. This kind of love is originated by the accidental conditions of life. This is not love, it is merely acquaintanceship. It is subject to change. Today you will see two souls apparently in close friendship. Tomorrow all this may be changed. Yesterday they were ready to die for one another. Today they shun one another's society. This is not love. It is the yielding of the hearts to the accidents of life. When that which has caused this love to exist passes, the love passes also. This is not in reality love. Love is only of the four kinds I have explained. A. The love of God towards the identity of God. Christ has said, God is love. B. The love of God for His children, for His servants. C. The love of man for God, and D. The love of man for man. These four kinds of love originate from God. These are rays from the sun of reality. These are the breathings of the Holy Spirit. These are the signs of the reality. End of The Four Kinds of Love by Abdul Baha Abbas. Read by Nicholas James Bridgewater.
A Haunted House by Virginia Woolf, for Monday or Tuesday. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For further information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Whatever hour you woke, there was a door shutting. From room to room they went, hand in hand, lifting here, opening there, making sure. A ghostly couple. "Here we left it," she said, and he added, "Oh, but here too!" "It's upstairs," she murmured. "And in the garden," he whispered. "Quietly," they said, "or we shall wake them." "But it wasn't that you woke us. Oh, no. They're looking for it. They're drawing the curtain, one might say, and so read on a page or two. Now they've found it. One would be certain, stopping the pencil on the margin, and then, tired of reading, one might rise and see for oneself the house all empty, the door standing open, only the wood pigeons bubbling with content and the hum of the threshing machines sounding through the farm. What did I come in here for? What did I want to find? My hands were empty. Perhaps it's upstairs then. The apples were in the loft. And so down again, the garden still as ever, only the book had slipped into the grass. But they had found it in the drawing-room. Not that one could ever see them. The window panes reflected apples, reflected roses, all the leaves were green in the glass. If they moved in the drawing-room, the apple only turned its yellow side. Yet, the moment after, if the door was opened, spread about the floor, hung upon the walls, pendant from the ceiling, what? My hands were empty. The shadow of a thrush crossed the carpet. From the deepest wells of silence the wood pigeon drew its bubble of sound. Safe, safe, safe. The pulse of the house beat softly. The treasure buried, the room. The pulse stopped short. Oh, was that the buried treasure? A moment later the light had faded. Out in the garden, then. But the trees spun darkness for a wandering beam of sun, so fine, so rare, coolly sunk beneath the surface the beam I sought always burnt behind the glass. Death was the glass, death was between us, coming to the woman first, hundreds of years ago. Leaving the house, sealing all the windows, the rooms were darkened. He left it, left her, went north, went east, saw the stars turned in the southern sky, sought the house, found it dropped beneath the downs. Safe, safe, safe. The pulse of the house beat gladly. The treasure yours. The wind roars up the avenue. Trees stoop and bend this way and that. Moonbeams splash and spill wildly in the rain. But the beam of the lamp falls straight from the window. The candle burns stiff and still. Wandering through the house, opening the windows, whispering not to wake us, the ghost couple seek their joy. Here we slept, she says, and he adds, kisses without number. Waking in the morning, silver between the trees. Upstairs, in the garden. When summer came, in winter snow time, the doors go shutting far in the distance, gently knocking like the pulse of a heart. Nearer they came, cease at the doorway. The wind falls, the rain slides silver down the glass. Our eyes darken. We hear no steps beside us. We see no lady spread her ghostly cloak. His hands shield the lantern. Look, he breathes, sound asleep, love upon their lips. Stooping, holding the silver lamp above us, long they look and deeply. Long they pause. The wind drives straightly. The flame stoops slightly. Wild beams of moonlight cross both floor and wall, and, meeting, stain the faces bent, the faces pondering, the faces that search the sleepers and seek their hidden joy. Safe, safe, safe. The heart of the house beats proudly. Long years, he sighs. Again you found me. Here, she murmurs, sleeping, in the garden reading, laughing, rolling the apples in the loft. Here we left our treasure. Stooping, their light lifts the lids upon my eyes. Safe, safe, safe! The pulse of the house beats wildly. Waking, I cry, "Oh, is this your buried treasure?" The light in the heart. End of A Haunted House. by Virginia Woolf. Recorded by Mary-Beth Blackburn at goldawardadventures.blogspot.com.
Haven't the Change by T.S. Arthur. From Home Scenes and Home Influence, a series of tales and sketches by T.S. Arthur. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Sharon Randall from the United Kingdom. Haven't the Change. It was house-cleaning time, and I had an old coloured woman at work scrubbing and cleaning paint. "Polly is going, ma'am," said one of my domestics as the twilight began to fall. "Very well. Tell her I shall want her tomorrow." "I think that she would like to have her money for today's work," said the girl. I took out my purse and found that I had nothing in it less than a $3 bill. "How much does she have a day?" "6 shillings, ma'am." "I haven't the change this evening. Tell her that I'll pay for both days tomorrow." The girl left the room, and I thought no more of Polly for an hour. Tea time had come and passed, when one of my domestics, who was rather communicative in her habits, said to me, "I don't think old Polly liked you not paying her this evening." "She must be very unreasonable, then," said I, without reflection. "I sent her word that I had no change. How did she expect I could pay her?" "Some people are queer, you know, Mrs. Graham," remarked the girl who had made the communication, more for the pleasure of telling it than anything else. I kept thinking over what the girl had said, until other suggestions came into my mind. "I wish I had sent and got a bill changed," said I, as the idea that Polly might be really in want of money intruded itself. It would have been very little trouble. This was the beginning of a new train of reflections, which did not make me very happy. To avoid a little trouble, I had sent the poor old woman away, after a hard day's work, without her money. That she stood in need of it was evident from the fact that she'd asked for it. "How very thoughtless in me," said I, as I dwelt longer and longer on the subject. "What's the matter?" inquired my husband, seeing me look serious. "Nothing to be very much troubled at," I replied. "Yet you are troubled." "I am, and cannot help it. You will, perhaps, smile at me, but small causes sometimes produce much pain. Old Polly has been at work all day, scrubbing and cleaning. When night came, she asked for her wages, and I, instead of taking the trouble to get the money for her, sent word that I had no change. There was nothing less than a $3 bill in my purse. I didn't reflect that a poor old woman, who has to go out to daily work, must need her money as soon as it is earned. I am very sorry." My husband did not reply for some time. My words appeared to have made considerable impression on his mind. "Do you know where Polly lives?" he inquired at length. "No, but I will ask the girl." And, immediately ringing the bell, I made inquiries as to where Polly lived. But no one in the house knew. "It cannot be helped now," said my husband in a tone of regret, "but I would be more thoughtful in future. The poor always have need of their money. Their daily labour rarely does more than supply their daily wants. I can never forget a circumstance that occurred when I was a boy. My mother was left a widow when I was but 9 years old, and she was poor. It was by the labour of her hands that she obtained shelter and food for herself and 3 little ones. Once, I remember the occurrence as if it had taken place yesterday. We were out of money and food. At breakfast time our last morsel was eaten, and we went through the long day without a mouthful of bread. We all grew very hungry by night, but our mother encouraged us to be patient a little, and a little while longer, until she finished the garment she was making, when she would take that and some other work home to a lady who would pay her for the work. Then, she said, we should have a nice supper. At last the work was finished, and I went with my mother to help carry it home, for she was weak and sickly, and even the light burden fatigued her. The lady for whom she had made the garment was in good circumstances, and had no want unmet that money could supply. When we came into her presence, she took the work, and, after glancing at it carelessly, said, "It will do very well." My mother lingered, perceiving which, the lady said, rather rudely, "You want your money, I suppose? How much does the work come to?" $2, replied my mother. The lady took out her purse and, after looking through a small parcel of bills, said, "I haven't the change this evening. Call over any time, and you shall have it." And, without giving my mother time more earnestly to urge her request, turned from us and left the room. I never shall forget the night that followed. My mother's feelings were sensitive and independent. She could not make known her want. And an hour after our return home, she sat, weeping, with her children around her, when a neighbour came in, and, learning our situation, supplied the present need. This relation did not make me feel any the more comfortable. Anxiously I waited, on the next morning, the arrival of Polly. As soon as she came, I sent for her, and, handing her the money she'd earned on the day before, said, "I'm sorry I hadn't a change for you last night, Polly. I hope you didn't want it very badly." Polly hesitated a little, and then replied, "Well, ma'am, I did want it very much, or I wouldn't have asked for it. My poor daughter Hetty is sick, and I wanted to get her something nice to eat." "I'm very sorry," said I, with sincere regret. "How is Hetty this morning?" "She isn't so well, ma'am." "And I feel very bad about her." "Come up to me in half an hour, Polly," said I. The old woman went downstairs. When she appeared again, according to my desire, I had a basket for her, in which were some wine, sugar, fruit, and various little matters that I thought her daughter would relish, and told her to go at once and take them to the sick girl. Her expression of gratitude touched my feelings deeply. Never since have I omitted, under any pretence, to pay the poor their wages as soon as earned. That is the end of Haven't the Change. It was read for LibriVox.org by Sharon Randall on the 19th of August, 2010.
Hearts and Hands by O. Henry, read by Aparna Vishwanatham. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Hearts and Hands. At Denver, there was an influx of passengers into the coaches on the eastbound B&M Express. In one coach, there sat a very pretty young woman, dressed in elegant taste and surrounded by all the luxurious comforts of an experienced traveler. Among the newcomers were two young men, one of handsome presence with a bold, frank countenance and manner, the other a ruffled, glum-faced person, heavily built and roughly dressed. The two were handcuffed together. As they passed down the aisle of the coach, the only vacant seat offered was a reversed one facing the attractive young woman. Here the linked couple seated themselves. The young woman's glance fell upon them with a distant, swift disinterest. Then, with a lovely smile brightening her countenance and a tender pink tingeing her rounded cheeks, she held out a little grey-gloved hand. When she spoke, her voice, full, sweet, and deliberate, proclaimed that its owner was accustomed to speak and be heard. "Well, Mr. Easton, if you will make me speak first, I suppose I must. Don't you ever recognize old friends when you meet them in the West?" The young man roused himself sharply at the sound of her voice, seemed to struggle with a slight embarrassment, which he threw off instantly, and then clasped her fingers with his left hand. "It's Miss Fairchild," he said with a smile. "I'll ask you to excuse the other hand. It's otherwise engaged just at present." He slightly raised his right hand, bound at the wrist by the shining bracelet, to the left one of his companion. The glad look in the girl's eyes slowly changed to a bewildered horror. The glow faded from her cheeks. Her lips parted in a vague, relaxing distress. Easton, with a little laugh as if amused, was about to speak again when the other forestalled him. The glum-faced man had been watching the girl's countenance with veiled glances from his keen, shrewd eyes. "You'll excuse me for speaking, miss, but I see you're acquainted with the marshal here. If you'll ask him to speak a word for me when we get to the pen, he'll do it, and it'll make things easier for me there. He's taking me to Leavenworth prison. It's 7 years for counterfeiting." "Oh," said the girl, with a deep breath and returning colour, "so that is what you're doing out here, a marshal?" "My dear Miss Fairchild," said Easton calmly, "I had to do something. Money has a way of taking wings unto itself, and you know it takes money to keep step with our crowd in Washington. I saw this opening in the West, and, well, a marshalship isn't quite as high as a position as that of an ambassador, but—" "The ambassador," said the girl warmly, "doesn't call any more. He needn't ever have done so. You ought to know that. And so now you're one of these dashing Western heroes, and you ride and shoot and go into all kinds of dangers. That's different from the Washington life. You have been missed from the old crowd." The girl's eyes, fascinated, went back, widening a little to rest upon the glittering handcuffs. "Don't you worry about them, miss," said the other man. "All marshals handcuff themselves to their prisoners to keep them from getting away. Mr. Easton knows his business." "Will we see you again soon in Washington?" asked the girl. "Not soon, I think," said Easton. "My butterfly days are over, I fear." "I love the West," said the girl irrelevantly. Her eyes were shining softly. She looked away out the car window. She began to speak truly and simply, without the gloss of style and manner. "Mamma and I spent the summer in Denver. She went home a week ago because father was slightly ill. I could live and be happy in the West. I think the air here agrees with me. Money isn't everything, but people always misunderstand things and remain stupid." "Say, Mr. Marshall," growled the glum-faced man, "this isn't quite fair. I'm needing a drink and haven't had a smoke all day. Haven't you talked long enough? Take me in the smoker now, won't you? I'm half dead for a pipe." The bound travellers rose to their feet, Easton with the same slow smile on his face. "I can't deny a petition for tobacco," he said lightly. "It's the one friend of the unfortunate. Goodbye, Miss Fairchild. Duty calls, you know." He held out his hand for a farewell. "It's too bad you're not going east," she said, reclothing herself with manner and style. "But you must go on to Leavenworth, I suppose?" "Yes," said Easton, "I must go on to Leavenworth." The two men sidled down the aisle into the smoker. Two passengers in a seat nearby had heard most of the conversation. Said one of them, "That Marshall's a good sort of chap. Some of these Western fellows are all right." "Pretty young to hold an office like that, isn't he?" asked the other. "Young?" exclaimed the first speaker. "Why, oh, didn't you catch on? Say, did you ever know an officer to handcuff a prisoner to his right hand?" End of Hearts and Hands by O. Henry. Read by Aparna Vishwanatham.
The Husband by Anton Chekhov. From The Tales of Chekhov, Volume 3, The Lady with the Dog and Other Stories by Anton Chekhov. Translated by Constance Garnett. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Husband. In the course of the maneuvers, the N Cavalry Regiment halted for a night at the district town of K. Such an event as the visit of officers always has the most exciting and inspiring effect on the inhabitants of provincial towns. The shopkeepers dream of getting rid of the rusty sausages and best brand sardines that have been lying for 10 years on their shelves. The inns and restaurants keep open all night. The military commandant, his secretary, and the local garrison put on their best uniforms. The police flit to and fro like mad, while the effect on the ladies is beyond all description. The ladies of K., hearing the regiment approaching, forsook their pans of boiling jam and ran into the street. Forgetting their morning deshabille and general untidiness, they rushed, breathless with excitement, to meet the regiment, and listened greedily to the band playing the march. Looking at their pale, ecstatic faces, one might have thought those strains came from some heavenly choir rather than from a military brass band. "The regiment!" they cried joyfully. "The regiment is coming!" What could this unknown regiment that came by chance today and would depart at dawn tomorrow mean to them? Afterwards, when the officers were standing in the middle of the square, and with their hands behind them, discussing the question of billets, all the ladies were gathered together at the examining magistrate's, and vying with one another in their criticism of the regiment. They already knew, goodness knows how, that the colonel was married, but not living with his wife, that the senior officer's wife had a baby born dead every year, that the adjutant was hopelessly in love with some countess, and had even once attempted suicide. They knew everything. When a pock-marked soldier in a red shirt darted past the windows, they knew for certain that it was Lieutenant Rimzov's orderly running about the town trying to get some English bitter ale on tick for his master. They had only caught a passing glimpse of the officers' backs, but had already decided that there was not one handsome or interesting man among them. Having talked to their heart's content, they sent for the military commandant and the committee of the club, and instructed them at all costs to make arrangements for a dance. Their wishes were carried out. At 9 o'clock in the evening, the military band was playing in the street before the club, while in the club itself, the officers were dancing with the ladies of K. The ladies felt as though they were on wings. Intoxicated by the dancing, the music, and the clank of spurs, they threw themselves, heart and soul, into making the acquaintance of their new partners, and quite forgot their old civilian friends. Their fathers and husbands, forced temporarily into the background, crowded round the meager refreshment table in the entrance hall. All these government cashiers, secretaries, clerks, and superintendents, stale, sickly-looking, clumsy figures, were perfectly well aware of their inferiority. They did not even enter the ballroom, but contented themselves with watching their wives and daughters in the distance, dancing with the accomplished and graceful officers. Among the husbands was Shalikov, the tax collector, a narrow, spiteful soul, given to drink, with a big, closely cropped head, and thick, protruding lips. He had had a university education. There had been a time when he used to read progressive literature and sing students' songs, but now, as he said of himself, he was a tax collector and nothing more. He stood leaning against the doorpost, his eyes fixed on his wife, Anna Pavlovna, a little brunette of 30, with a long nose and a pointed chin, tightly laced with her face carefully powdered. She danced without pausing for breath, danced till she was ready to drop exhausted. But though she was exhausted in body, her spirit was inexhaustible. One could see as she danced that her thoughts were with the past, that far-away past when she used to dance at the college for young ladies, dreaming of a life of luxury and gaiety, and never doubting that her husband was to be a prince, or at the worst, a baron. The tax collector watched, scowling with spite. It was not jealousy he was feeling. He was ill-humored. First, because the room was taken up with dancing, and there was nowhere he could play a game of cards. Secondly, because he could not endure the sound of wind instruments. And thirdly, because he fancied the officers treated the civilians somewhat too casually and disdainfully. But what, above everything, revolted him and moved him to indignation was the expression of happiness on his wife's face. "It makes me sick to look at her," he muttered. "Going on for 40, and nothing to boast of at any time, and she must powder her face and lace herself up, and frizzing her hair, flirting and making faces, and fancying she's doing the thing in style. Ugh! You're a pretty figure, upon my soul." Anna Pavlovna was so lost in the dance that she did not once glance at her husband. "Of course not. Where do we poor country bumpkins come in?" sneered the tax collector. "We are at a discount now. We're clumsy seals, unpolished provincial bears, and she's the queen of the ball. She has kept enough of her looks to please even officers. They'd not object to making love to her, I dare say." During the mazurka, the tax collector's face twitched with spite. A black-haired officer with prominent eyes and Tartar cheekbones danced the mazurka with Anna Pavlovna, assuming a stern expression. He worked his legs with gravity and feeling, and so crooked his knees that he looked like a jack-a-dandy pulled by strings, while Anna Pavlovna, pale and thrilled, bending her figure languidly and turning her eyes up, tried to look as though she scarcely touched the floor, and evidently felt herself that she was not on earth, not at the local club, but somewhere far, far away in the clouds. Not only her face, but her whole figure was expressive of beatitude. The tax collector could endure it no longer. He felt a desire to jeer at that beatitude, to make Anna Pavlovna feel that she had forgotten herself, that life was by no means so delightful as she fancied now in her excitement. "You wait. I'll teach you to smile so blissfully," he muttered. "You are not a boarding school miss. You are not a girl. An old fright ought to realize she is a fright." Petty feelings of envy, vexation, wounded vanity, of that small provincial misanthropy engendered in petty officials by vodka and a sedentary life, swarmed in his heart like mice. Waiting for the end of the mazurka, he went into the hall and walked up to his wife. Anna Pavlovna was sitting with her partner, and flirting her fan, and coquettishly dropping her eyelids, was describing how she used to dance in Petersburg. Her lips were pursed up like a rosebud, and she pronounced, "At home in Petersburg." "Anyuta, let us go home," croaked the tax collector. Seeing her husband standing before her, Anna Pavlovna started as though recalling the fact that she had a husband. Then she flushed all over. She felt ashamed that she had such a sickly-looking, ill-humored, ordinary husband. "Let us go home," repeated the tax collector. "Why, it's quite early." "I beg you to come home," said the tax collector deliberately, with a spiteful expression. "Why, has anything happened?" Anna Pavlovna asked in a flutter. "Nothing has happened, but I wish you to go home at once. I wish it, that's enough, and without further talk, please." Anna Pavlovna was not afraid of her husband, but she felt ashamed on account of her partner, who was looking at her husband with surprise and amusement. She got up and moved a little apart with her husband. "What notion is this?" she began. "Why go home? Why, it's not 11 o'clock." "I wish it, and that's enough. Come along, and that's all about it." "Don't be silly. Go home alone if you want to." "All right, then I shall make a scene." The tax collector saw the look of beatitude gradually vanish from his wife's face, saw how ashamed and miserable she was, and he felt a little happier. "Why do you want me at once?" asked his wife. "I don't want you, but I wish you to be at home. I wish it, that's all." At first Anna Pavlovna refused to hear of it. Then she began entreating her husband to let her stay just another half hour. Then, without knowing why, she began to apologize, to protest, and all in a whisper, with a smile that the spectators might not suspect that she was having a tiff with her husband. She began assuring him she would not stay long, only another 10 minutes, only 5 minutes. But the tax collector stuck obstinately to his point. "Stay if you like," he said, "but I'll make a scene if you do." And as she talked to her husband, Anna Pavlovna looked thinner, older, plainer, pale, biting her lips, and almost crying. She went out to the entry and began putting on her things. "You're not going?" asked the ladies in surprise. "Anna Pavlovna, you are not going, dear?" "Her head aches," said the tax collector for his wife. Coming out of the club, the husband and wife walked all the way home in silence. The tax collector walked behind his wife, and watching her downcast, sorrowful, humiliated little figure, he recalled the look of beatitude which had so irritated him at the club, and the consciousness that the beatitude was gone filled his soul with triumph. He was pleased and satisfied, and at the same time he felt the lack of something. He would have liked to go back to the club and make everyone feel dreary and miserable, so that all might know how stale and worthless life is when you walk along the streets in the dark and hear the slush of the mud under your feet, and when you know that you will wake up next morning with nothing to look forward to but vodka and cards. Oh, how awful it is! And Anna Pavlovna could scarcely walk. She was still under the influence of the dancing, the music, the talk, the lights, and the noise. She asked herself as she walked along why God had thus afflicted her. She felt miserable, insulted, and choking with hate as she listened to her husband's heavy footsteps. She was silent, trying to think of the most offensive, biting, and venomous words she could hurl at her husband, and at the same time she was fully aware that no word could penetrate her tax collector's hide. What did he care for words? Her bitterest enemy could not have contrived for her a more helpless position. And meanwhile, the band was playing, and the darkness was full of the most rousing, intoxicating dance tunes. End of The Husband by Anton Chekhov. Read by Bill Mosley.
Indiscretion by Guy D. Maupassant. From the entire original Maupassant short stories. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by doublemirrors. Indiscretion. They had loved each other before marriage with a pure and lofty love. They had first met on the seashore. He had thought this young girl charming as she passed by with her light-coloured parasol and her dainty dress amid the marine landscape against the horizon. He had loved her, blonde and slender, in these surroundings of blue and ocean and spacious sky. He could not distinguish the tenderness which this budding woman awoke in him from the vague and powerful emotion which the fresh salt air and the grand scenery of surf and sunshine and waves aroused in his soul. She, on the other hand, had loved him because he had courted her, because he was young, rich, kind, and attentive. She had loved him because it is natural for young girls to love men who whisper sweet nothings to them. So for 3 months they had lived side by side and hand in hand. The greeting which they exchanged in the morning before the bath, in the freshness of the morning, or in the evening on the sand under the stars and the warmth of a calm night, whispered low, very low, already had the flavour of kisses, though their lips had never met. Each dreamed of the other at night, each thought of the other on waking, and without yet having voiced their sentiments, each longed for the other, body and soul. After marriage their loves descended to earth. It was at first a tireless, sensuous passion, then exalted tenderness, composed of tangible poetry, more refined caresses, and new and foolish inventions. Every glance and gesture was an expression of passion. But little by little, without even noticing it, they began to get tired of each other. Love was still strong, but they had nothing more to reveal to each other, nothing more to learn from each other. No new tale of endearment, no unexpected outburst, no new way of expressing the well-worn, oft-repeated verb. They tried, however, to rekindle the dwindling flame of the first love. Every day they tried some new trick or desperate attempt to bring back to their hearts the uncooled ardour of their first days of married life. They tried moonlit walks under the trees, in the warmth of the summer evenings, the poetry of mist-covered beaches, the excitement of public festivals. One morning Henriette said to Paul, "Will you take me to the cafe for dinner?" "Certainly, dearie." "To some well-known cafe?" "Of course." He looked at her with a questioning glance, seeing that she was thinking something which she did not wish to tell. She went on, "You know, one of those cafes. Oh, how can I explain myself? A sporty cafe." He smiled. "Of course, I understand. You mean in one of the cafes which are commonly called Bohemian?" "Yes, that's it. But take me to one of the big places. One where you are known, one where you have already supped to, no, dined, well, you know, I never dare say it." "Go ahead, dearie, little secrets should no longer exist between us." "No, I dare not." "Go on, don't be prudish. Tell me." "Well, I want to be taken for your sweetheart, there. And I want the boys who do not know that you are married to take me for such, and you too. I want you to think that I am your sweetheart for 1 hour in that place which must hold so many memories for you. There. And I will play that I am your sweetheart. It's awful, I know. I am abominably ashamed. I am as red as a peony. Don't look at me." He laughed, greatly amused, and answered, "All right. We'll go tonight to that very swell place where I am well known." Towards 7 o'clock they went up the stairs of one of the big cafes on the boulevard, he smiling with the look of a conqueror, she timid, veiled, and delighted. They were immediately shown to one of the luxurious private dining rooms, furnished with 4 large armchairs and a red plush couch. The head waiter entered and brought them the menu. Paul handed it to his wife. "What do you want to eat?" "I don't care. Order whatever is good." After handing his coat to the waiter, he ordered dinner and champagne. The waiter looked at the young woman and smiled. He took the order and murmured, "Will Monsieur Paul have his champagne sweet or dry?" "Dry, very dry." Henriette was pleased to hear that this man knew her husband's name. They sat on the couch side by side and began to eat. 10 candles lighted the room and were reflected in all the mirrors around them, which seemed to increase the brilliancy 1,000-fold. Henriette drank glass after glass in order to keep up her courage, although she felt dizzy after the first few glasses. Paul, excited by the memories which returned to him, kept kissing his wife's hands. His eyes were sparkling. She was feeling strangely excited in this new place, restless, pleased, a little guilty, but full of life. 2 waiters, serious, silent, accustomed to seeing and forgetting everything, to entering the room only when it was necessary, and to leaving it when they felt they were intruding, were silently flitting hither and thither. Towards the middle of the dinner, Henriette was well under the influence of champagne. She was prattling along fearlessly, her cheeks flushed, her eyes glistening. "Come, Paul, tell me everything." "What, sweetheart?" "I don't dare tell you." "Go on." "Have you loved many women before me?" He hesitated, a little perplexed, not knowing whether he should hide his adventures or boast of them. She continued, Oh, please tell me, how many have you loved? A few. How many? I don't know. How do you expect me to know such things? Haven't you counted them? Of course not. Then you must have loved a good many. Perhaps. About how many? Just tell me how many. But I don't know, dearest. Some years a good many and some years only a few. How many a year did you say? Sometimes 20 or 30, sometimes only 4 or 5. Oh, that makes more than 100 in all. Yes, just about. Oh, I think that is dreadful. Why dreadful? Because it's dreadful when you think of it, all those women and always the same thing. Oh, it's dreadful. Just the same, more than 100 women. He was surprised that she should think that dreadful, and answered with that air of superiority which men take with women when they wish to make them understand that they have said something foolish. That's funny. If it is dreadful to have 100 women, it is dreadful to have one. Oh no, not at all. Why not? Because with one woman you can have a real bond of love which attaches you to her, while with 100 women it's not the same at all. There is no real love. I don't understand how a man can associate with such women. But they are all right. No, they can't be. Yes, they are. Oh, stop, you disgust me. But then, why did you ask me how many sweethearts I had had? Because that's no reason. What were they? Actresses, little shop girls, or society women? A few of each. It must have been rather monotonous towards the last. Oh no, it's amusing to change. She remained thoughtful, staring at her champagne glass. It was full. She drank it in one gulp, then putting it back on the table, she threw her arms around her husband's neck and murmured in his ear, "Oh, how I love you, sweetheart, how I love you." He threw his arms around her in a passionate embrace. A waiter, who was just entering, backed out, closing the door discreetly. In about 5 minutes the head waiter came back, solemn and dignified, bringing the fruit for dessert. She was once more holding between her fingers a full glass, and gazing into the amber liquid as though seeing unknown things. She murmured in a dreamy voice, "Yes, it must be fun." End of Indiscretion by Guy D. Maupassant.
Jimmy Hayes and Muriel. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Jimmy Hayes and Muriel from Sixes and Sevens by O. Henry. 1. Supper was over, and there had fallen upon the camp the silence that accompanies the rolling of corn-husk cigarettes. The water-hole shone from the dark earth like a patch of fallen sky. Coyotes yelped. Dull thumps indicated the rocking horse movements of the hobbled ponies as they moved to fresh grass. A half-troop of the Frontier Battalion of Texas Rangers were distributed about the fire. A well-known sound, the fluttering and scraping of chaparral against wooden stirrups, came from the thick brush above the camp. The Rangers listened cautiously. They heard a loud and cheerful voice call out reassuringly, "Brace up, Muriel, old girl. We're most there now. Been a long ride for you, ain't it? You old antediluvian handful of animated carpet tacks. Hey, now, quit a-trying to kiss me. Don't hold on to my neck so tight. This here paint hoss ain't any too sure-footed, let me tell you. He's liable to dump us both off if we don't watch out." 2 minutes of waiting brought a tired paint pony single-footing into camp. A gangling youth of 20 lolled in the saddle. Of the Muriel whom he had been addressing, nothing was to be seen. "Hi, fellows!" shouted the rider cheerfully. This here's a letter for Lieutenant Manning. He dismounted, unsaddled, dropped the coils of his stake rope, and got his hobbles from the saddle horn. While Lieutenant Manning, in command, was reading the letter, the newcomer rubbed solicitously at some dried mud in the loops of the hobbles, showing a consideration for the forelegs of his mount. "Boys," said the lieutenant, waving his hand to the rangers, "this is Mr. James Hayes. He's a new member of the company. Captain McLean sends him down from El Paso. The boys will see that you have some supper, Hayes, as soon as you get your pony hobbled." The recruit was received cordially by the rangers. Still they observed him shrewdly and with suspended judgment. Picking a comrade on the border is done with 10 times the care and discretion with which a girl chooses a sweetheart. On your sidekicker's nerve, loyalty, aim, and coolness your own life may depend many times. After a hearty supper, Hayes joined the smokers about the fire. His appearance did not settle all the questions in the minds of his brother rangers. They saw simply a loose, lank youth with tow-colored, sunburned hair and a berry-brown, ingenuous face that wore a quizzical, good-natured smile. "Fellows," said the new ranger, "I'm going to introduce you to a lady friend of mine. Ain't ever heard anybody call her a beauty, but you'll all admit she's got some fine points about her. Come along, Muriel." He held open the front of his blue flannel shirt. Out of it crawled a horned frog. A bright red ribbon was tied jauntily about its spiky neck. It crawled to its owner's knee and sat there motionless. "This here Muriel," said Hayes, with an oratorical wave of his hand, "has got qualities. She never talks back, she always stays at home, and she's satisfied with one red dress for every day, and Sunday too." "Look at that blamed insect," said one of the rangers with a grin. "I've seen plenty of them horny frogs, but I never knew anybody to have one for a side partner. Does the blame thing know you from anybody else?" "Take it over there and see," said Hayes. The stumpy little lizard, known as the horned frog, is harmless. He has the hideousness of the prehistoric monsters whose reduced descendant he is, but he is gentler than the dove. The ranger took Muriel from Hayes' knee and went back to his seat on a roll of blankets. The captive twisted and clawed and struggled vigorously in his hand. After holding it for a moment or two, the ranger set it upon the ground. Awkwardly but swiftly, the frog worked its 4 oddly moving legs until it stopped close by Hayes' foot. "Well, dang my hide," said the other ranger. "The little cuss knows you. Never thought them insects had that much sense." 2. Jimmy Hayes became a favorite in the ranger camp. He had an endless store of good nature and a mild perennial quality of humor that is well adapted to camp life. He was never without his horned frog. In the bosom of his shirt during rides, on his knee or shoulder in camp, under his blankets at night, the ugly little beast never left him. Jimmy was a humorist of a type that prevails in the rural South and West. Unskilled in originating methods of amusing or in witty conceptions, he had hit upon a comical idea and clung to it reverently. It had seemed to Jimmy a very funny thing to have about his person, with which to amuse his friends, a tame horned frog with a red ribbon around its neck. As it was a happy idea, why not perpetuate it? The sentiments existing between Jimmy and the frog cannot be exactly determined. The capability of the horned frog for lasting affection is a subject upon which we have had no symposiums. It is easier to guess Jimmy's feelings. Muriel was his chef d'oeuvre of wit, and as such he cherished her. He caught flies for her, and shielded her from sudden northers. Yet his care was half selfish, and when the time came she repaid him 1,000-fold. Other Muriels have thus overbalanced the light attentions of other Jimmies. Not at once did Jimmy Hayes attain full brotherhood with his comrades. They loved him for his simplicity and drollness, but there hung above him a great sword of suspended judgment. To make merry in camp is not all of a ranger's life. There are horse thieves to trail, desperate criminals to run down, bravos to battle with, bandits to rout out of the chaparral, peace and order to be compelled at the muzzle of a six-shooter. Jimmy had been most generally a cowpuncher, he said. He was inexperienced in ranger methods of warfare. Therefore the rangers speculated apart and solemnly as to how he would stand fire. For, let it be known, the honor and pride of each ranger company is the individual bravery of its members. For 2 months the border was quiet. The rangers lolled listless in camp, and then, bringing joy to the resting guardians of the frontier, Sebastiano Salvador, an eminent Mexican desperado and cattle thief, crossed the Rio Grande with his gang and began to lay waste the Texas side. There were indications that Jimmy Hayes would soon have the opportunity to show his mettle. The rangers patrolled with alacrity, but Salvador's men were mounted like Lochinvar and were hard to catch. One evening about sundown, the rangers halted for supper after a long ride. Their horses stood panting with their saddles on. The men were frying bacon and boiling coffee. Suddenly, out of the brush, Sebastiano Salvador and his gang dashed upon them with blazing six-shooters and high-voiced yells. It was a neat surprise. The rangers swore in annoyed tones and got their Winchesters busy, but the attack was only a spectacular dash of the purest Mexican type. After the florid demonstration, the raiders galloped away, yelling down the river. The rangers mounted and pursued, but in less than 2 miles the fagged ponies labored so that Lieutenant Manning gave the word to abandon the chase and return to the camp. Then it was discovered that Jimmy Hayes was missing. Someone remembered having seen him run for his pony when the attack began, but no one had set eyes on him since. Morning came, but no Jimmy. They searched the country round, on the theory that he had been killed or wounded, but without success. Then they followed after Salvador's gang, but it seemed to have disappeared. Manning concluded that the wily Mexican had recrossed the river after his theatric farewell, and indeed no further depredations from him were reported. This gave the rangers time to nurse a soreness they had. As has been said, the pride and honor of the company is the individual bravery of its members. And now they believed that Jimmy Hayes had turned coward at the whiz of Mexican bullets. There was no other deduction. Buck Davis pointed out that not a shot was fired by Salvador's gang after Jimmy was seen running for his horse. There was no way for him to have been shot. No, he had fled from his first fight. Afterward he would not return, aware that the scorn of his comrades would be a worse thing to face than the muzzles of many rifles. So Manning's detachment of McLean's company, Frontier Battalion, was gloomy. It was the first blot on its escutcheon. Never before in the history of the service had a ranger shown the white feather. All of them had liked Jimmy Hayes, and that made it worse. Days, weeks, and months went by, and still that little cloud of unforgotten cowardice hung above the camp. 3. Nearly a year afterward, after many camping grounds and many hundreds of miles guarded and defended, Lieutenant Manning, with almost the same detachment of men, was sent to a point only a few miles below their old camp on the river to look after some smuggling there. One afternoon, while they were riding through a dense mesquite flat, they came upon a patch of open hog-wallow prairie. There they rode upon the scene of an unwritten tragedy. In a big hog-wallow lay the skeletons of 3 Mexicans. Their clothing alone served to identify them. The largest of the figures had once been Sebastiano Salazar. His great, costly sombrero, heavy with gold ornamentation, a hat famous all along the Rio Grande, lay there, pierced by 3 bullets. Along the ridge of the hog-wallow rested the rusting Winchesters of the Mexicans, all pointing in the same direction. The Rangers rode in that direction for 50 yards. There, in a little depression of the ground, with his rifle still bearing on the 3, lay another skeleton. It had been a battle of extermination. There was nothing to identify the solitary defender. His clothing, such as the elements had left distinguishable, seemed to be of the kind that any ranchman or cowboy might have worn. "Some cowpuncher," said Manning, "that they caught out alone. Good boy, he put up a dandy scrap before they got him. So that's why we didn't hear from Don Sebastiano any more." And then, from beneath the weather-beaten rags of the dead man, there wriggled out a horned frog with a faded red ribbon around its neck, and sat upon the shoulder of its long, quiet master. Mutely it told the story of the untried youth and the swift paint pony, how they had outstripped all their comrades that day in the pursuit of the Mexican raiders, and how the boy had gone down upholding the honor of the company. The ranger troop herded close, and a simultaneous wild yell arose from their lips. The outburst was at once a dirge, an apology, an epitaph, and a paean of triumph. A strange requiem, you may say, over the body of a fallen comrade. But if Jimmy Hayes could have heard it, he would have understood. End of Jimmy Hayes and Muriel by O. Henry. Recorded by Bill Mosley, Frellsburg, Texas, USA.
Letter 5 by Anonymous from An Englishwoman's Love Letters. Read by Exie Sands. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Most beloved, I have been thinking, staring at this blank piece of paper, and wondering how then am I ever to say what I have in me here, not wishing to say anything at all, but just to be. I feel that I am living now only because you love me, and that my life will have run out like this penful of ink when that use in me is past. Not yet, beloved, oh, not yet. Nothing is finished that we have to do and be, hardly begun. I will not even call this midsummer, however much it seems so. It is still only spring. Every day your love binds me more deeply than I knew the day before, so that no day is the same now, but each one a little happier than the last. My own, you are my very own, and yet, true as that is, it is not so true that I am your own. It is less absolute, I mean, and must be so, because I cannot very well take possession of anything when I am given over heart and soul out of my own possession. There isn't enough identity left in me. I am yours so much, so much. All this is useless to say, yet what can I say else if I have to begin saying anything? Could I truly be your star and goddess, as you call me, beloved? I would do you the service of Thetis, at least, who did it for a greater than herself. Bid heaven and earth combine their charms, and round you early, round you late, Briareus fold his 100 arms to guard you from your single fate. But I haven't got power over an 8-armed octopus even, so am merely a very helpless, loving nonentity which merges itself most happily in you, and begs to be lifted to no pedestal at all, at all. If you love me in a manner that is at all possible, you will see that goddess does not suit me. Star, I would I were now, with a wide eye to carry my looks to you over this horizon which keeps you invisible. Choose one, if you will, dearest, and call it mine, and to me it shall be yours, so that when we are apart and the stars come out, our eyes may meet up at the same point in the heavens, and be keeping company for us among the celestial bodies, with their permission. For I have too lively a sense of their beauty not to be a little superstitious about them. Have you not felt for yourself a sort of physiognomy in the constellations, most of them seeming benevolent and full of kind regards, but not all? I am always glad when the great bear goes away from my window, fine beast though he is. He seems to growl at me. No doubt it is largely a question of names, and what's in a name? In yours, beloved, when I speak it, more than I can compass. End of Letter 5 by Anonymous.
The Light on the Hills by Mrs. W. K. Clifford, from Very Short Stories and Verses for Children. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Light on the Hills. I want to work at my picture, he said, and went into the field. The little sister went too, and stood by him, watching while he painted. The trees are not quite straight, she said presently. And oh, dear brother, the sky is not blue enough. It will all come right soon, he answered. Will it be of any good? Oh, yes, she said, wondering that he should even ask. It will make people happy to look at it. They will feel as if they were in the field. If I do it badly, will it make them unhappy? Not if you do your very best, she answered, for they will know how hard you have tried. Look up, she said, suddenly. Look up at the light upon the hills. And they stood together looking at all he was trying to paint, at the trees and the field, at the deep shadows and the hills beyond, and the light that rested upon them. It is a beautiful world, the girl said. It is a great honor to make things for it. It is a beautiful world, the boy echoed sadly. It is a sin to disgrace it with things that are badly done. But you will do things well. I get so tired, he said, and long to leave off so much. What do you do when you want to do your best? Your very, very best, he asked suddenly. I think that I am doing it for the people I love, she answered. It makes you very strong if you think of them. You can bear pain and walk far and do all manner of things, and you don't get tired so soon. He thought for a moment. Then I shall paint my picture for you, he said. I shall think of you all the time I am doing it. Once more they looked at the hills that seemed to rise up out of the deep shadows into the light, and then together they went home. Soon afterwards a great sorrow came to the boy. While the little sister slept, she wandered into another world, and journeyed on so far that she lost the clue to earth, and came back no more. The boy painted many pictures before he saw the field again, but in the long hours as he sat and worked, there came to him a strange power that answered more and more truly to the longing in his heart, the longing to put into the world something of which he was not ashamed, something which should make it, if only in the person of its meanest, humblest citizen, a little happier or better. At last, when he knew that his eye was true and his touch sure, he took up the picture he had promised to paint for the dear sister, and worked at it until he was finished. "This is better than all he has done before," the beholders said. "It is surely beautiful, for it makes one happy to look at it." "And yet my heart ached as I did it," the boy said, as he went back to the field. "I thought of her all the time I worked. It was sorrow that gave me power." It seemed as if a soft voice that spoke only to his heart answered back, "Not sorrow, but love. And perfect love has all things in its gift, and of it are all things born save happiness, and though that may be born too—" "How does one find happiness?" interrupted the boy. "It is a strange chase," the answer seemed to be. "To find it for one's own self, one must seek it for others. We all throw the ball for each other. But it is so difficult to seize. Perfect love helps one to live without happiness," his own heart answered to himself. "And above all things, it helps one to work and to wait." "But if it gives one happiness too?" he asked eagerly. "Ah, then it is called heaven." End of The Light on the Hills by Mrs. W. K. Clifford. Read by Louise Norbury.
The Merchant and the Book Agent by Anonymous, from The Wit and Humor of America, Volume 6. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Rosie. The Merchant and the Book Agent by Anonymous. A book agent importuned James Watson, a rich merchant living a few miles out of the city, until he bought a book, The Early Christian Martyrs. Mr. Watson didn't want the book, but he bought it to get rid of the agent. Then, taking it under his arm, he started for the train which takes him to his office in the city. Mr. Watson hadn't been gone long before Mrs. Watson came home from a neighbor's. The book agent saw her, and went in and persuaded the wife to buy a copy of the book. She was ignorant of the fact that her husband had bought the same book in the morning. When Mr. Watson came back in the evening, he met his wife with a cheery smile as he said, "Well, my dear, how have you enjoyed yourself today? Well, I hope." "Oh, yes, had an early caller this morning." "Ah, and who was she?" "It wasn't a she at all. It was a gentleman, a book agent." "A what?" "A book agent, and to get rid of his importuning I bought his book, The Early Christian Martyrs. See, here it is," she exclaimed, advancing toward her husband. "I don't want to see it," said Watson, frowning terribly. "Why, husband?" asked his wife. "Because that rascally book agent sold me the same book this morning. Now we've got 2 copies of the same book, 2 copies of The Early Christian Martyrs, and— But, husband, we can't—" "No, we can't either," interrupted Mr. Watson. "The man is off on the train before this. Confound it, I could kill the fellow. Why, there he goes to the depot now," said Mrs. Watson, pointing out of the window at the retreating form of the book agent, making for the train. "But it's too late to catch him, and I'm not dressed. I've taken off my boots, and—" Just then Mr. Stevens, a neighbor of Mr. Watson, drove by, when Mr. Watson pounded on the window pane in a frantic manner, almost frightening the horse. "Here, Stevens," he shouted, "you're hitched up. Won't you run your horse down to the train and hold that book agent till I come? Run, catch him now." "All right," said Mr. Stevens, whipping up his horse and tearing down the road. Mr. Stevens reached the train just as the conductor shouted, "All aboard?" "Book agent," he yelled as the book agent stepped on the train. "Book agent, hold on. Mr. Watson wants to see you." "Watson? Watson wants to see me?" repeated the seemingly puzzled book agent. "Oh, I know what he wants. He wants to buy one of my books, but I can't miss the train to sell it to him." "If that's all he wants, I can pay for it and take it back to him. How much is it?" $2 for The Early Christian Martyrs," said the book agent, as he reached for the money and passed the book out of the car window. Just then Mr. Watson arrived, puffing and blowing in his shirt sleeves. As he saw the train pull out, he was too full for utterance. Well, I got it for you, said Stevens. Just got it, and that's all. Got what? Yelled Watson. Why, I got the book, Early Christian Martyrs, and paid. By the great guns, moaned Watson, as he placed his hands to his brow and swooned right in the middle of the street. End of The Merchant and the Book Agent. Recording by Rosie. The Omnibus by Arthur Thomas Quiller Couch, from Noughts and Crosses. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Rosie. The Omnibus. It was not so much a day as a burning, fiery furnace. The roar of London's traffic reverberated under a sky of coppery blue. The pavements threw out waves of heat, thickened with the reek of restaurants and perfumery shops, and dust became cinders, and the wearing of flesh a weariness. Streams of sweat ran from the bellies of bus horses when they halted. Men went up and down with unbuttoned waistcoats, turned into drinking bars, and were no sooner inside than they longed to be out again and baking in an ampler oven. Other men, who had given up drinking because of the expense, hung about the fountains in Trafalgar Square, and listened to the splash of running water. It was the time when London is supposed to be empty, and when those who remain in town feel there is not room for a soul more. We were 11 inside the omnibus when it pulled up at Charing Cross, so that legally there was room for just one more. I had travelled enough in omnibuses to know my fellow passengers by heart, a governess with some sheets of music in her satchel, a minor actress going to rehearsal, a woman carrying her incurable complaint for the 100th time to the hospital, 3 middle-aged city clerks, a couple of reporters with weak eyes and low collars, an old loose-cheeked woman exhaling patchouli, a bald-headed man with hairy hands, a violent breastpin, and the indescribable air of a matrimonial agent. Not a word passed. We were all failures in life, and could not trouble to dissemble it, in that heat. Moreover, we were used to each other, as types if not as persons, and had lost curiosity. So we sat listless, dispirited, drawing difficult breath and staring vacuously. The hope we shared in common, that nobody would claim the vacant seat, was too obvious to be discussed. But at Charing Cross the 12th passenger got in, a boy with a stick and a bundle in a blue handkerchief. He was about 13, bound for the docks, we could tell at a glance, to sail on his first voyage, and, by the way he looked about, we could tell as easily that in stepping outside Charing Cross station he had set foot on London stones for the first time. When we pulled up, he was standing on the opposite pavement with dazed eyes like a hare's, wondering at the new world, the hansoms, the yelling newsboys, the flower women, the crowd pushing him this way and that, the ugly shop fronts, the hurry and stink and din of it all. Then, hailing our bus, he started to run across, faltered, almost dropped his bundle, was snatched by our conductor out of the path of a running hansom, and hauled on board. His eyelids were pink and swollen, but he was not crying, though he wanted to. Instead, he took a great gulp, as he pushed between our knees to his seat, and tried to look brave as a lion. The passengers turned an incurious, half-resentful stare upon him, and then repented. I think that more than one of us wanted to speak, but dared not. It was not so much the little chap's look, but to the knot of his sea-kit there was tied a bunch of cottage flowers, Sweet Williams, Boy's Love, Love Lies Bleeding, a few common striped carnations, and a rose or two, and the sight and smell of them in that frowsy bus were like tears on thirsty eyelids. We had ceased to pity what we were, but the heart is far withered that cannot pity what it has been, and it made us shudder to look on the young face set towards the road along which we had travelled so far. Only the minor actress dropped a tear, but she was used to expressing emotion, and halfway down the Strand the bus stopped and she left us. The woman with an incurable complaint touched me on the knee. "Speak to him," she whispered, but the whisper did not reach, for I was 200 miles away, and occupied in starting off to school for the first time. I had 2 shillings in my pocket, and at the first town where the coach baited, I was to exchange these for a cocoanut and a clasp knife. Also I was to break the knife in opening the nut, and the nut, when opened, would be sour. A sense of coming evil, therefore, possessed me. "Why don't you speak to him?" The boy glanced up, not catching her words, but suspicious, then frowned and looked defiant. "Ah," she went on in the same whisper, "it's only the young that I pity. Sometimes, sir, for my illness keeps me much awake, I lie at night in my lodgings and listen, and the whole of London seems filled with the sound of children's feet running. Even by day I can hear them, at the back of the uproar." The matrimonial agent grunted and rose as we halted at the top of Essex Street. I saw him slip a couple of half-crowns into the conductor's hand, and he whispered something, jerking his head back towards the interior of the bus. The boy was brushing his eyes, under pretence of putting his cap forward, and by the time he stole a look around to see if anyone had observed, we had started again. I pretended to stare out of the window, but marked the wet smear on his hand as he laid it on his lap. In less than a minute it was my turn to alight. Unlike the matrimonial agent, I had not 2 half-crowns to spare, but, catching the sick woman's eye, forced up courage to nod and say, "Good luck, my boy." "Good day, sir." A moment after I was in the hot crowd, whose roar rolled east and west for miles, and at the back of it, as the woman had said, in street and side lane and blind alley, I heard the footfall of a multitude more terrible than an army with banners, the ceaseless pelting feet of children, of Whittingtons turning and turning again. End of The Omnibus by Arthur Thomas Quiller Couch. Recording by Rosie.
On Girls from Hints for Lovers by Arnold Holting. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Michael Evans, Urbana, Illinois. On Girls by Arnold Holting. A Pearl, a Girl. Browning. There are, of course, girls and girls, yet at heart they are pretty much alike. In age, naturally, they differ wildly. But this is a thorny subject. Suffice it to say that all men love all girls, the maid of Sweet 16 equally with the maid of untold age. There is something exasperatingly something or otherish about girls. And they know it, which makes them more something or otherish still. There is no other word for it. A girl is a complicated thing. It is made up of clothes, smiles, a pompadour, things of which space and prudence forbid the enumeration here. These things by themselves do not constitute a girl which is obvious, nor is any one girl without these things which is not too obvious. Where the things end and the girl begins, many men have tried to find out. Many girls would like to be men, except on occasions. At least, so they say, but perhaps this is just a part of their something or otherishness. Why they should want to be men, men cannot conceive. Men pale before them, grow hot and cold before them, run before them and after them, swear by them and at them, and a bit of a chit of a thing in short skirts and lisle-thread stockings will twist able-bodied males round her little finger. It is an open secret that girls are fonder of men than they are of one another, which is very lucky for the men. Girls differ, and the same girl is different at different times. When she is by herself, she is one thing. When she is with other girls, she is another thing. When she is with a lot of men, she is a third sort of thing. When she is with a man. But this baffled even Agur, the son of Jakeh. As a rule, a man prefers a girl by herself. This is natural. And yet it is said that you cannot have too much of a good thing. If this were true, a bevy of girls would be the height of happiness. Yet some men would sooner face the bulls of Bashan. Some foolish men, probably poets, have sought for and asserted the existence of the ideal girl. This is sheer nonsense. There is no such thing. And if there were, she could not compare with the real girl, the girl of flesh and blood, which, as someone ought to have said, are excellent things in a woman. Other men, equally foolish, have regarded girls as playthings. I wish these men had tried to play with them. They would have found that they were playing with fire and brimstone. Yet the veriest spitfire can be wondrous sweet. Sweet? Yes. On the whole, a girl is the sweetest thing known or knowable. On the whole of this terrestrial sphere, nature has produced nothing more adorable than the high-spirited, high-bred girl. Of this she is quite aware, to our cost. I speak as a man. The consequence is, her price has gone up, and the man has to pay high and pay all sorts of things. Ices, sweets, champagne, drives, church-goings, and sometimes spot cash. Men are always wishing they knew all about girls. It is a precious good thing that they don't, not that this is in any way disparaging to the girls. The fact is, a girl is an infinite puzzle, and it is this puzzle that, among other things, tickles the men and rouses their curiosity. What a man doesn't know about a girl would fill a Saratoga trunk. What he does know about her would go into her workbox. The littlest girl is a little woman. No boy knows this, and precious few grown-up men. Thus, many a grown-up man plays with a girl, then finds himself in love with her. As to the girl, always the girl knows whether the play is leading. She probably chooses the game. Very late in life does a man learn the truth and significance of that ancient proverb that kissing goes by favor. For the masculine mind is the slave of law and justice. Aphrodite never heard of law or justice. She was born at sea. That is to say, few are the men who at some time in their lives have not wondered at the vagaries of girlish complaisance. The foolish, the ne'er-do-well, the bully, the careless, the cruel. It is to these often that a girl's caress is given. And curiously enough, that is, curiously enough as it seems to purblind law-loving man, should the favored one be openly convicted, that alters not one whit his statue with the girl. For a girl, having given her heart, never recalls it wholly. She may regret, she never recoils. In other words, to the man of her own free lawless choice, a girl is always loyal. To subsequent and subordinate attachments she is dutiful. So even the renegade, if loved by a girl, will be upheld by that girl through thick and thin. Secretly, it may be, for often the girl, nevertheless devotedly, and only under compulsion, will he listen to the detractor. He may desert her, or, if he sticks to her, he may beat her. No matter. He holds her heart in the hollow of his hand. But few things mystify poor law-abiding man than this, that the central, the profoundest, the most portentous puzzle of the universe, the wheel of woe of two high-aspiring, much-enduring, youthful human souls, should be the sport of what seems to him the veriest and merest chance. The unconscious search of sweet 16 is for, in mathematical language which will not sophisticate her, the integral of love. Yet in the short years between 16 and 20, a girl's love will undergo rapid and startling developments. A girl with lots of brothers has more chances of matrimony than a girl with none. She knows more of men, especially of their weaknesses and idiosyncrasies. And to know the weaknesses and idiosyncrasies of men is perhaps a wife's chief task, unless it be to put up with them. Often enough, the freckled and fragrant girl wins over the professional beauty. Sometimes grown-up girls are just as shy as little ones, and for the same reasons, because there is no one who knows how to play with them. Girls often play with love as if it were one of the amusements of life, but a day comes when love proves itself the most sensuous thing on earth, and a girl is quick to discover the kind of love that is required of her. As a rule, many a girl who has been sore put it to prove herself wholehearted. For of course, always every suitor expects wholeheartedness, and this every girl instinctively knows. Indeed, is not a half-hearted love, or a half-hearted acceptress of love, a contradiction in terms? A certain measure of the sophistication or unsophistication of a youthful damsel may be found in her manner of receiving the attentions of a stranger in a station different from her own. Young women, themselves but rarely unsophisticated, view with a certain pitying sort of curiosity unsophisticatedness in men, and a young man's unsophisticatedness it is a great delight to a woman to eradicate. Yet a girl regards with complex emotions the man who has blossomed under the genial warmth of her rays. The flattery to own powers is counterbalanced by the evidence of lack of power in him. A girl thinks she detects flippancy in seriousness. A woman thinks she detects seriousness in flippancy. What would be conduct decidedly risque in a city miss is often innocent playfulness in a country maid. Between the ages of 16 and 18, girls play with love as if it were a doll. Very soon after 20, they discover it is a dynamo. This is why an early and clandestine engagement often works more havoc than happiness, for either one of the parties to the concealed compact receives or pays attention which perturb the other, or a subsequent and acknowledged lover looks askance at the previous entanglement, since even if a clandestine engagement, as is usually the case, is merely a flirtation with the emoluments which accompany a promise to marry, those emoluments are not nice things for a subsequent and avowed lover, whether masculine or feminine, to think upon. Lastly, a laxity with regard to the claims of courtship is apt to breed a laxity with regard to the claims of wedlock. In short, flirtations, like clandestine engagements, are an affront to love. Accordingly, to the engagement ring should be as attached as much importance as to the wedding ring. Indeed, a difficult and a delicate path it is that a girl has to tread through life, and often enough a dangerous. Yet with extraordinary deftness she treads it. She must win her a mate, yet has to pretend that the mate wins her. She makes believe to be captured, yet has herself to be intent on the chase. To be wooed and wedded is the law of her being, yet not for one moment dares she to exhibit too great an alacrity to obey that law. For she knows instinctively that an easy victory prognosticates a fickle victor. Is she abundantly endowed with the very attributes that make for wife and motherhood, a strong and swaying passion, and an affection unbound? She must hold them in leash with exemplary patience, for alas, are they given the rein for a single passing moment, instead of being accounted unto her for righteousness, they work her ruin. She must win her one man, and she must win him for life, but she cannot pick or choose, for she must wait to be asked. If she make test of many admirers, she is described as a flirt. If, conscientious and demure, she await her fate, a desirable fate is by no means assured. In truth, it seems that too often a girl must dissemble, hateful as dissemblance is in men. 'Tis a hard road indeed that a girl has to travel. To win her a fellow farer for life, she must go out of her way to accommodate so many travelers, and this one is lured by this, and that one by that, and another by something unnoticed by the throng. But if she dissembles one iota too much, her fellow-farers look askance, and he who eventually joins her for good upbraids her for that by which she won. Dissemblance is indeed at once the boon and the bane of a girl. Without it, she thinks to be overlooked, often enough a preposterous assumption. With it, she is looked upon too much, and always a girl has to pretend that never did she descend to dissemblance, which nevertheless is sometimes absolutely true, for just now and then there happens that miracle of miracles, where there flames up in the man and there flames up in the maid, in both at once, unaided and unlooked for, which smoulders lambent in every youthful breast. When maid and man take mutual fire at touch of hands and look of eyes, fire lit at that vestal altar which knows no source, and burns for aye. End of On Girls by Arnold Holting.
The Shirt Collar, translated from the German of Hans Andersen from the Pink Fairy Book, edited by Andrew Lang. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This recording by Sharon House. There was once a fine gentleman whose entire worldly possessions consisted of a bootjack and a hairbrush. But he had the most beautiful shirt collar in the world, and it is about this that we are going to hear a story. The shirt collar was so old that he began to think about marrying, and it happened one day that he and a garter came into the wash-tub together. "Hullo!" said the shirt collar. "Never before have I seen anything so slim and delicate, so elegant and pretty. May I be permitted to ask your name?" "I shan't tell you," said the garter. "Where is the place of your abode?" asked the shirt-collar. But the garter was of a bashful disposition, and did not think it proper to answer. "Perhaps you are a girdle," said the shirt-collar. "An under-girdle? For I see that you are for use as well as for ornament, my pretty miss." "You ought not to speak to me," said the garter. "I'm sure I haven't given you any encouragement." "When anyone is as beautiful as you," said the shirt-collar, "is not that encouragement enough?" "Go away! Don't come so close," said the garter. "You seem to be a gentleman." "So I am, and a very fine one too," said the shirt-collar. "I possess a bootjack and a hairbrush." That was not true. It was his master who owned these things, but he was a terrible boaster. "Don't come so close," said the garter. "I'm not accustomed to such treatment." "What affectation," said the shirt-collar. And then they were taken out of the wash-tub, starched, and hung on a chair in the sun to dry, and then laid on the ironing-board. Then came the glowing iron. "Mistress Widow," said the shirt-collar, "dear Mistress Widow, I am becoming another man. All my creases are coming out. You are burning a hole in me. Ugh! Stop, I implore you." "You rag," said the iron, travelling proudly over the shirt-collar, for it thought it was a steam-engine and ought to be at the station drawing trucks. "Rag," it said. The shirt-collar was rather frayed out at the edge, so the scissors came to cut off the threads. "Oh," said the shirt-collar, "you must be a dancer. How high you can kick! That is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen. No man can imitate you." "I know that," said the scissors. "You ought to be a duchess," said the shirt-collar. "My worldly possessions consist of a fine gentleman, a bootjack, and a hairbrush. If only I had a duchy." "What? He wants to marry me?" said the scissors, and she was so angry that she gave the collar a sharp snip, so that it had to be cast aside as good for nothing. "Well, I shall have to propose to the hairbrush," thought the shirt-collar. "It is really wonderful what fine hair you have, madam. Have you ever thought of marrying?" "Ah, yes, that I have," answered the hairbrush. "I'm engaged to the bootjack." "Engaged!" exclaimed the shirt-collar. And now there was no one he could marry, so he took to despising matrimony. Time passed, and the shirt-collar came in a rag bag to the paper mill. There was a large assortment of rags, the fine ones in one heap and the coarse ones in another, as they should be. They had all much to tell, but no one more than the shirt-collar, for he was a hopeless braggart. "I have had a terrible number of love affairs," he said. "They give me no peace. I was such a fine gentleman, so stiff with starch. I had a bootjack and a hairbrush, which I never used. You should have just seen me then. Never shall I forget my first love. She was a girdle, so delicate and soft and pretty. She threw herself into a wash-tub for my sake. Then there was a widow who glowed with love for me, but I left her alone till she became black. Then there was the dancer who inflicted the wound which has caused me to be here now. She was very violent. My own hairbrush was in love with me and lost all her hair in consequence. Yes, I have experienced much in that line, but I grieve most of all for the garter. I mean the girdle, who threw herself into a wash-tub. I have much on my conscience. It's high time for me to become white paper." And so he did. He became white paper, the very paper on which this story is printed. And that was because he had boasted so terribly about things which were not true. We should take this to heart, so that it may not happen to us, for for we cannot indeed tell if we may not some day come to the rag bag and be made into white paper, on which will be printed our whole history, even the secret parts, so that we too go about the world relating it like the shirt collar. End of the Shirt Collar by Hans Andersen.
The Wind Blows by Catherine Mansfield. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Wind Blows. Suddenly, dreadfully, she wakes up. What has happened? Something dreadful has happened. No, nothing has happened. It is only the wind shaking the house, rattling the windows, banging a piece of iron on the roof, and making her bed tremble. Leaves flutter past the window, up and away, down in the avenue. A whole newspaper wags in the air like a lost kite, and falls, spiked on a pine tree. It is cold. Summer is over. It is autumn. Everything is ugly. The carts rattle by, swinging from side to side. Two Chinamen lollop along under their wooden yokes, with the straining vegetable baskets. Their pigtails and blue blouses fly out in the wind. A white dog on 3 legs yelps past the gate. It is all over. What is... Oh, everything! And she begins to plait her hair with shaking fingers, not daring to look in the glass. Mother is talking to grandmother in the hall. A perfect idiot. Imagine leaving anything out on a line in weather like this. Now my best little Tenerife work tea-cloth is simply in ribbons. What is that extraordinary smell? It's the porridge burning. Oh heavens, this wind. She has a music lesson at 10 o'clock. At the thought, the minor movement of the Beethoven begins to play in her head. The trills, long and terrible, like little rolling drums. Marie Swainson runs into the garden next door to pick the chrysanthemums before they are ruined. Her skirt flies up above her waist. She tries to beat it down, to tuck it between her legs while she stoops, but it is no use. Up it flies. All the trees and bushes beat about her. She picks as quickly as she can, but she is quite distracted. She doesn't mind what she does. She pulls the plants up by the roots and bends and twists them, stamping her foot and swearing. "For heaven's sake, keep the front door shut. Go round the back," shouts someone, and then she hears Bogey. "Mother, you're wanted on the telephone. Telephone, mother, it's the butcher." How hideous life is. Revolting, simply revolting. And now her hat elastics snapped. Of course it would. She'll wear her old tan and slip out the back way. But mother has seen. "Mathilda, Mathilda, come back immediately. What on earth have you got on your head? It looks like a tea cosy. And why have you got that mane of hair on your forehead?" "I can't come back, mother. I'll be late for my lesson." "Come back immediately." She won't. She won't. She hates mother. "Go to hell," she shouts, running down the road. In waves, in clouds, in big round whirls, the dust comes stinging, and with it little bits of straw and chaff and manure. There is a loud roaring sound from the trees in the gardens, and standing at the bottom of the road outside Mr. Bullen's gate, she can hear the sea sob. Ah, ah, ah. But Mr. Bullen's drawing room is as quiet as a cave. The windows are closed, the blinds half pulled, and she is not late. The girl before her has just started playing MacDowell's To an Iceberg. Mr. Bullen looks over at her and half smiles. "Sit down," he says. "Sit over there in the sofa corner, little lady." How funny he is. He doesn't exactly laugh at you, but there is just something. Oh, how peaceful it is here. She likes this room. It smells of art serge and stale smoke and chrysanthemums. There is a big vase of them on the mantelpiece behind the pale photograph of Rubinstein, "À mon ami Robert Boulin." Over the black glittering piano hangs Solitude, a dark, tragic woman draped in white, sitting on a rock, her knees crossed, her chin on her hands. "No, no," cries Mr. Bullen as he leans over the other girl, puts his arms over her shoulders and plays the passage for her. The stupid... she's blushing. How ridiculous. Now the girl before her has gone. The front door slams. Mr. Bullen comes back and walks up and down very softly, waiting for her. What an extraordinary thing. Her fingers tremble so that she can't undo the knot in her music satchel. It's the wind. And her heart beats so hard she feels it must lift her blouse up and down. Mr. Bullen does not say a word. The shabby red piano seat is long enough for two people to sit side by side. Mr. Bullen sits down by her. "Shall I begin with scales?" she asks, squeezing her hands together. "I had some arpeggios too." But he does not answer. She doesn't believe he even hears. And then suddenly his fresh hand with the ring on it reaches over and opens Beethoven. "Let's have a little of the old master," he says. But why does he speak so kindly, so awfully kindly, and as though they had known each other for years and years and knew everything about each other? He turns the page slowly. She watches his hand. It is a very nice hand and always looks as though it had just been washed. "Here we are," says Mr. Bullen. Oh, that kind voice. Oh, that minor movement. Here come the little drums. "Shall I take the repeat?" "Yes, dear child." His voice is far, far too kind. The crotchets and quavers are dancing up and down the stave like little black boys on a fence. Why is he so... She will not cry. She has nothing to cry about. "What is it, dear child?" Mr. Bullen takes her hands. His shoulder is there, just by her head. She leans on it ever so little, her cheek against the springy tweed. "Life is so dreadful," she murmurs. But she does not feel it's dreadful at all. He says something about waiting and marking time and that rare thing, a woman, but she does not hear. It is so comfortable. Forever. Suddenly the door opens and in pops Marie Swainson, hours before her time. "Take the allegretto a little faster," says Mr. Bullen, and gets up and begins to walk up and down again. "Sit in the sofa corner, little lady," he says to Marie. The wind. The wind. It's frightening to be here in her room by herself. The bed, the mirror, the white jug and basin gleam like the sky outside. It's the bed that is frightening. There it lies, sound asleep. Does Mother imagine for one moment that she is going to darn all those stockings knotted up on the quilt like a coil of snakes? She's not. No, Mother, I do not see why I should. The wind. The wind. There's a funny smell of soot blowing down the chimney. Hasn't anyone written poems to the wind? I bring fresh flowers to the leaves and showers. What nonsense. Is that you, Bogey? Come for a walk round the esplanade, Matilda. I can't stand this any longer. Righto. I'll put on my ulster. Isn't it an awful day? Bogey's ulster is just like hers. Hooking the collar, she looks at herself in the glass. Her face is white. They have the same excited eyes and hot lips. Ah, they know, those two in the glass. Goodbye, dears. We shall be back soon. This is better, isn't it? Hook on, says Bogey. They cannot walk fast enough. Their heads bent, their legs just touching. They stride like one eager person through the town, down the asphalt zigzag where the fennel grows wild, and on to the esplanade. It is dusky, just getting dusky. The wind is so strong that they have to fight their way through it, rocking like two old drunkards. All the poor little Pohutakawas on the esplanade are bent to the ground. Come on, let's get near. Over by the breakwater the sea is very high. They pull off their hats, and her hair blows across her mouth, tasting of salt. The sea is so high that the waves do not break at all. They thump against the rough stone wall and suck up the weedy, dripping steps. A fine spray skims from the water right across the esplanade. They are covered with drops. The inside of her mouth tastes wet and cold. Bogey's voice is breaking. When he speaks, he rushes up and down the scale. It's funny. It makes you laugh, and yet it just suits the day. The wind carries their voices. Away fly the sentences like narrow ribbons. Quicker, quicker. It is getting very dark. In the harbour the coal hulks show two lights, one high on a mast, and one from the stern. Look, Bogey, look over there. A big, black steamer with a long loop of smoke streaming, with the portholes lighted, with lights everywhere, is putting out to sea. The wind does not stop her. She cuts through the waves, making for the open gate between the pointed rocks that leads to... It's the light that makes her look so awfully beautiful and mysterious. They are on board, leaning over the rail, arm in arm. Who are they? Brother and sister. Look, Bogey, there's the town. Doesn't it look small? There's the post office clock chiming for the last time. There's the esplanade that we walked that windy day. Do you remember? I cried at my music lesson that day. How many years ago? Goodbye, little island, goodbye. Now the dark stretches a wing over the tumbling water. They can't see those two anymore. Goodbye, goodbye. Don't forget. But the ship is gone now. The wind. End of The Wind Blows by Catherine Mansfield.